The divorce papers slid across the custom Calacatta marble island, coming to a dead stop right next to my coffee mug. I stared at the crisp white pages, my hands trembling slightly. But it was not from grief, and it was certainly not from a broken heart. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to smile right there on the spot. My husband of 10 years stood across from me, his chest puffed out under his tailored suit, looking like a man who had just conquered the world. Beside him stood his mistress, admiring my imported crystal chandeliers, completely unaware of what tomorrow would bring. I am Kendra, 35 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was playing the role of the quiet, supportive wife to a man who genuinely believed his mediocre salary funded our millionaire lifestyle. When he told me to pack my personal belongings and get out of his house, I simply nodded. He had no idea that empty houses tell no lies. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch a toxic person dig their own grave just so you could politely hand them the shovel. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a family that worshipped male authority, I learned early on that a successful Black woman was expected to shrink herself so the men around her could shine. My older brother Andre was the golden child, praised heavily just for existing and doing the bare minimum. Meanwhile, my grueling 80-hour work weeks and early financial investments were routinely dismissed as me being too aggressive or too independent for my own good. When I met Trey, I was 25 and already running my own highly lucrative venture capital firm. Trey was handsome, charismatic, and desperately trying to get his first tech startup off the ground. He had a lot of pride, way too much of it. When his startup inevitably collapsed 3 years into our marriage, his ego completely shattered. He became deeply insecure, constantly lashing out at me for being the primary breadwinner. To save him the humiliation and to stop his overbearing mother Patricia from constantly lecturing me about emasculating my husband, I made a choice I would spend the next decade regretting. I quietly absorbed all of our major living expenses through an anonymous holding company I created called Vanguard Estates. When Trey finally landed a mid-level executive role at a consulting firm, Vanguard Estates purchased the $7 million mansion in Buckhead where we lived. Vanguard Estates leased the luxury vehicles we drove. Vanguard Estates paid the property taxes, the landscaping team, and the high-end interior designers. I funneled my wealth so deep underground that Trey genuinely believed his low six-figure salary was somehow affording a lifestyle meant for a titan of industry. I let him play the king of the castle. I let him brag at dinner parties about his financial acumen. I hid my massive venture capital success behind the title of a simple freelance consultant. I did it all to protect the pride of a man who was currently standing in my kitchen, demanding I vacate my own property. Trey tapped his expensive watch against the marble countertop. It was a watch I had secretly paid for. "Sign the papers, Kendra," he said, his voice dripping with unearned condescension. "I want this done clean. I am keeping the house, obviously. I pay the mortgage. You can take your clothes, your jewelry, and whatever personal items you need to start over. The rest stays." Vanessa, a 28-year-old woman who looked like she spent her entire life chasing VIP sections at nightclubs, stepped out from behind him. She ran her perfectly manicured hand along the edge of my custom velvet sofa. She picked up a framed photograph of Trey and me from our wedding day, looked at it with disgust, and casually dropped it face down into the trash can. "Honestly, Trey," she whined, looking at me with absolute disdain, "we are going to have to redecorate entirely. Her taste is so boring. It feels like a corporate waiting room in here. I want something more vibrant, something more me. I need a space that reflects our new life together, not the past." Trey puffed out his chest even further, soaking in her validation. "You are absolutely right, babe." He looked at me, shaking his head as if I were a child who had disappointed him. "You see, Kendra, my career is really taking off. I am about to close the biggest deal of my life at Apex Consulting. I need a woman who understands her place, a woman who supports my Black excellence, instead of just playing around on her laptop all day, pretending to run a business. Vanessa knows how to treat a real man. You just never figured it out." I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a plate or scream about the 10 years of blind loyalty I had given him. I looked at Trey, waiting for him to show even a shred of respect for the woman who had held him together when he was absolutely nothing. Instead, he wrapped his arm around Vanessa's waist and kissed her temple, completely dismissing my presence in the room. "Whatever you want, babe," he murmured to her. "It is our house now." He turned his attention back to me, his expression hardening into a look of absolute arrogance. "You have 3 hours, Kendra. Vanessa and I are going out for a celebratory lunch downtown. When we get back, I expect you to be gone. Leave your keys on the counter. Do not try to take any of the artwork, the electronics, or the imported dining set. My lawyer has a full inventory of the assets, and I will call the police immediately if anything is missing." I picked up the heavy silver pen lying next to the documents. I did not bother reading the settlement agreement. I knew exactly what it said, and more importantly, I knew exactly how legally worthless it was regarding the assets he thought he possessed. I signed my name with smooth, deliberate strokes. I pushed the papers back across the island, making sure to look him dead in the eyes. "I will only take what belongs to me," I said quietly. Trey sneered, grabbing the papers and slipping them into his leather briefcase. "Good. Try to be an adult about this. Do not make a scene on your way out. You can call an Uber. I am taking the Porsche today." He turned and walked toward the front door, Vanessa trailing behind him like a victorious shadow. She shot me one last triumphant look over her shoulder, a smug little smile playing on her lips before the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them. The house fell into a deafening silence. I stood alone in the massive gourmet kitchen, surrounded by the finest appliances money could buy. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and watched Trey's Porsche pull out of the long, gated driveway. He was leaving to celebrate his new life, fully believing he had just discarded me and kept the empire. He believed he had won. He believed he had outsmarted the quiet wife he never bothered to truly know. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had kept on speed dial for my business operations. The line rang twice before my logistics manager answered. "David," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I need the rapid response staging team at the Buckhead property immediately. Bring the largest commercial moving trucks we have in the fleet. Tell the crew we are doing a full extraction." "How much are we pulling, boss?" he asked, his tone shifting into professional gear. "Every single item," I replied. "The furniture, the rugs, the televisions, the artwork, the silverware, the towels in the bathrooms, the light bulbs in the lamps. If Vanguard Estates paid for it, strip it down to the drywall. Leave absolutely nothing behind but the echoes." "What about the vehicles in the garage?" David asked. "Bring the flatbeds for the Mercedes and the Range Rover," I instructed. "Trey took the Porsche, but the corporate tracker is active. We will handle that repossession later. Right now, focus on the house. You have exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes to make this place look like it was never inhabited." "Consider it done," David said, hanging up. I walked over to the velvet sofa Vanessa had insulted. I ran my hand along the fabric, feeling a genuine deep smile finally break across my face. Trey wanted me to pack my personal belongings. He wanted me to take only what I owned. What he failed to realize during his entire 10-year illusion of grandeur was that I owned the sofa. I owned the marble island. I owned the house. I owned the very ground he walked on. And by the time he finished his expensive steak dinner with his new mistress, his entire billionaire lifestyle was going to vanish into thin air. The rumble of diesel engines echoed through the gated driveway exactly 20 minutes after I made the call. David and his crew did not waste a single second. 3 massive moving trucks backed up to the front doors, and an army of professional movers poured into the house. I stood in the foyer, arms crossed, watching them dismantle the life I had meticulously curated to stroke my husband's ego. They took the custom velvet sofa Vanessa had sneered at. They unbolted the 70-inch flat screens from the walls. They carefully packed away the crystal chandeliers, leaving only bare wires hanging from the ceiling. I watched them empty the kitchen, removing the smart refrigerator, the imported espresso machine, and every piece of silverware. When David asked about Trey's closet, I told him to leave the cheap suits Trey had bought himself before we met. but to pack the Rolex collection, the designer shoes, and the custom-tailored jackets Vanguard Estates had financed. Outside the flatbed, tow trucks arrived for the Range Rover and the Mercedes. Seeing them strapped down and hauled away was incredibly satisfying. Trey loved those cars. He used to post photos of himself leaning against the hoods with captions about grinding and the hustle. He never mentioned the hustle consisted of me transferring funds to cover the lease payments. By the 2-hour mark, the $7 million mansion was completely gutted. It looked exactly as it had the day I bought it. Cold, empty, and hollow. Just like my marriage. I handed David my keys, thanked the crew, and stepped into my waiting private car. I directed my driver to take me to the penthouse suite I had secured downtown. From there, I opened my laptop and pulled up the live feed from the hidden security cameras Vanguard Estates had legally installed for property protection. Exactly 3 hours and 15 minutes after they had left for their celebratory lunch, Trey's Porsche pulled back into the driveway. Through the camera feed, I watched him swagger out of the driver's side holding the door for Vanessa. She was laughing, probably already planning which interior designer she was going to hire with my money. Trey unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The silence that hit him must have been deafening. I watched his face on the high-definition screen. The arrogant smirk melted off his features, instantly replaced by absolute confusion. He stepped into the foyer, his voice echoing off the bare walls. He called my name, sounding more like a confused child than a conquering king. Vanessa walked in behind him and stopped dead in her tracks. The massive living room, which had been perfectly staged just hours ago, was completely empty. No rugs, no art, no furniture. Just the indentations on the carpet where the sofa used to sit. My phone rang almost immediately. The caller ID flashed Trey's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water before I answered. "Kendra, what did you do?" Trey screamed into the receiver. His voice was vibrating with panic. "Where is my furniture? Where are the cars? What kind of crazy vindictive game are you playing?" I kept my voice perfectly level. "I did exactly what you asked, Trey. You told me to pack my personal belongings and leave. I am just following instructions." "Are you out of your mind?" he yelled, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing through the empty house on the security feed. "You stole everything. You took the televisions. You took the refrigerator. You took my Mercedes. I am calling the police right now. You are going to jail for grand larceny." I smiled at the screen. "You should definitely call the police, Trey. In fact, put them on speakerphone when they get there. I am sure the officers would love to review the ownership documents." "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I pulled up the digital folder on my desktop. "I am talking about Vanguard Estates, Trey, the company that owns the house you are currently standing in, the company that owns every single piece of furniture, every appliance, and every vehicle except that Porsche." He laughed, but it was a breathless, panicked sound. "You do not own Vanguard Estates. That is a massive corporate staging firm. They handle our property management." "I own 85% of Vanguard Estates," I corrected him gently. "I founded it 10 years ago. It is a subsidiary of my venture capital firm. I bought this house through Vanguard to protect you from the reality that you could not afford to live in this zip code. Your consulting salary covers exactly 0% of this lifestyle." The silence on the line was beautiful. I watched him on the camera, standing in the middle of the empty living room, his phone pressed to his ear, his face draining of all color. "Legally speaking, Trey, you are a month-to-month tenant of Vanguard Estates," I continued. "And since you just served me with divorce papers and demanded I vacate the holding company, has officially terminated your verbal lease. The property has been staged down. You have 24 hours to remove your remaining cheap suits from the primary closet before the locks are changed, and you are hit with trespassing charges." "You cannot do this to me," he whispered, the reality finally breaking through his massive ego. "I am a partner at Apex Consulting. I am about to close a major deal. I need this house. I need those cars for my image." "Your image was funded by your wife," I said coldly, "and your wife just resigned from her position as your primary investor. Enjoy the bare walls, Trey." I hung up the phone. On the screen, I watched Trey slowly lower his phone. He looked around the empty room as if hoping the furniture would magically reappear. Then the true chaos began. Vanessa, who had been listening to the entire one-sided conversation, absolutely lost her mind. I watched her throw her designer handbag onto the hardwood floor, screaming at him. The audio feed picked up every word. "What do you mean she took everything?" Vanessa shrieked. "You told me you bought this house. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me she was just a consultant who sat at home all day." Trey tried to reach for her, stammering apologies, promising he could fix it. He told her about his big deal closing on Monday, begging her to just trust him. "I am not sleeping on a hardwood floor, Trey," Vanessa yelled, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. "You are going to take me to the Ritz-Carlton right now. You are going to book the executive suite, and you are going to buy me a new wardrobe to make up for this humiliation. If you do not have a room key in your hand in 20 minutes, we are done." Trey, desperate to keep the woman he had just thrown his marriage away for, nodded frantically. He promised her the world. He promised her the Ritz. He grabbed her hand and they stormed out of the empty house, slamming the door behind them. I sat back in my plush chair at the penthouse, opening a new tab on my computer. I logged into the secure portal for my venture capital firm's corporate banking system. Trey was right about one thing. He did have a black card. It was a corporate expense card issued through his employer, Apex Consulting. What Trey did not know, and what he was about to find out the hard way, was the true corporate structure of Apex Consulting. I watched the GPS tracker on the Porsche as it sped down the highway toward the downtown Ritz-Carlton. I gave them exactly 25 minutes to arrive, hand their car over to the valet, and strut into the luxurious lobby. I imagined Trey puffing his chest back out, trying to impress Vanessa with his platinum status, trying to prove he was still the wealthy mogul he claimed to be. I watched the pending transactions screen on my secure portal. Right on cue, a pre-authorization charge for $4,500 from the Ritz-Carlton appeared on the screen. Trey was booking the executive suite just as Vanessa demanded. I clicked the red button next to the account number. Freeze asset. The pre-authorization vanished. The account status turned from active to suspended. I leaned back and took a slow, deep breath, imagining the exact look on Trey's face as the front desk clerk handed that black card back to him with a polite, apologetic smile, informing the great self-made CEO that his card had just been declined. Let us rewind for a moment to understand exactly how a man could be so blind to his own financial reality. When I first met Trey, he had ambition, but he lacked the strategic mind to execute it. He wanted to be the boss, the man in charge, the visionary. I loved him, so I became his silent architect. When his first company was drowning in debt, I quietly bought out his creditors. When he needed to show his peers he had made it, I created the vanguard structure to provide the aesthetics of wealth without bruising his patriarchal pride. I let him believe his grinding and networking were paying the bills. I nodded and smiled at dinner parties when he gave other men advice on how to build wealth. I sat quietly while his mother Evelyn praised the Lord for blessing her son with such a brilliant mind, often reminding me that I was lucky. A high-value man like Trey chose a woman who spent too much time on her computer. I endured the microaggressions from his family, the condescending remarks about my simple wardrobe, and the constant reminders that my primary duty was to support my husband's legacy. I swallowed it all because I believed in our vows. I believed we were a team. But a team does not bring a 28-year-old mistress into a house I paid for. A team does not hand over divorce papers over a morning cup of coffee with a smug smile. Now, sitting in my penthouse command center, I felt the last lingering threads of my devotion to him snap and dissolve into nothing. The screen refreshed, showing another declined transaction. Trey was trying to use a different card at the hotel. Also declined. That was the secondary card linked to our joint checking account, which I had legally drained and transferred to a secure trust the moment he handed me the divorce papers. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an incoming call from Trey. He was likely standing in the lobby of the Ritz, humiliated, with Vanessa breathing down his neck, realizing he did not have the funds to pay for a single night in a standard room, let alone the executive suite. I did not answer. I let it ring, watching the missed call notification pop up on the screen. Then a text message came through. It was not from Trey, it was from our family group chat. The chat included my parents, Trey Evelyn, my older brother Andre, and Andre's wife Lauren. I clicked open the message. It was from Andre. Trey just called me. Kendra, what is wrong with you? Clearing out the man's house, cutting off his bank accounts. You are acting like a spiteful, bitter woman who could not keep her man happy. Grow up and give him his stuff back before I have to come down there and handle this myself. I read the text twice. The sheer audacity of my brother stepping in to defend the man who had just proudly flaunted his mistress in my face was staggering. But it was completely on brand for Andre. In our family, men protected men. The women were expected to endure, to forgive, and to maintain the image of a strong black family no matter how toxic the reality was. Evelyn chimed in right after him. Praying for you, Kendra. A wise woman builds her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own hands. You pushed him to this with your coldness. You should be asking the Lord for forgiveness, not throwing childish tantrums. I stared at the screen, my heart beating with a steady clinical rhythm. Andre was threatening me. Evelyn was lecturing me. They were rallying around the cheater, completely comfortable turning me into the villain. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea that Andre's massive suburban home, his lavish vacations, and his shiny new boat were entirely funded by a silent venture capital grant I had approved to keep his failing logistics business afloat. Andre thought he was a self-made boss, just like Trey. I typed a simple response to the group chat, thumbs up emoji. I set the phone down. The gloves were off. They wanted to protect Trey's illusion of excellence. They wanted to call me bitter and foolish. I was going to show them exactly what a foolish woman could do when she decides to stop funding the patriarchy. A few minutes later, another text popped up on my personal line. This one was from Lauren, Andre's white wife. She had always played the role of the progressive, supportive sister-in-law, while subtly dropping the most insulting backhanded compliments imaginable. Hey Kendra, so sorry about the drama today. Trey is just stressed. You know how men get when their pride is hurt. Andre and I are hosting a barbecue this Sunday. Trey and Vanessa are coming. You should come too, and we can all sit down and talk it out peacefully like adults. It is better to preserve the family peace than to be right. Hugs. I read the invitation. She was inviting the mistress to the family barbecue. She wanted me to show up, sit across from the woman who tried to claim my home, and talk it out peacefully to preserve their comfort. I smiled, typing my reply. Thank you, Lauren. I will absolutely be there. Cannot wait to see you all. I closed the laptop and stood up, walking over to the expansive windows looking out over the city lights. Trey thought he could discard me. My family thought they could bully me into submission. They were about to learn that when you poke a sleeping bear, you should not be surprised when it wakes up and decides to eat you alive. Sunday was going to be a very interesting day. The morning of the barbecue arrived with a crisp and clear sky. I stood in the expansive walk-in closet of my downtown penthouse, running my fingers over rows of impeccably tailored garments. Today was not a day for casual sundresses or polite denim. Today was a day for absolute warfare, and a warrior must dress the part. I selected a tailored emerald green blazer and matching trousers. It was bold, unapologetic, and cost more than my brother Andre made in a single fiscal quarter. Over the past 48 hours, my intelligence network had kept me fully updated on my soon-to-be ex-husband. After his public humiliation at the Ritz-Carlton, Trey had nowhere to turn. His corporate accounts were frozen. His personal accounts were drained. Vanessa, realizing her wealthy prize was suddenly out of funds, had thrown a monumental fit in the hotel lobby before forcing him to call for help. And who did Trey call? He called the one man guaranteed to protect male fragility at all costs. My older brother, Andre. I secured my diamond earrings, letting the cool metal ground me as I thought about my brother. Growing up in a traditional African-American household in Atlanta, the rules of our family were unspoken, but strictly enforced. The men were kings, and the women were their loyal subjects. Andre was the undisputed golden boy of the family. If Andre managed to scrape by with a C- in high school, my parents threw a celebratory dinner to praise his effort. When I graduated at the top of my class and secured a full academic scholarship to an Ivy League university, my parents simply nodded. My mother even warned me to soften my ambition, claiming that being too smart and working too hard would intimidate potential husbands. I was taught from a young age that my brilliance was a liability while my brother's mediocrity was a triumph. That dynamic continued well into our adult lives. Andre loved to play the role of the self-made patriarch. He loved to boast at family gatherings about his thriving logistics business, his sprawling suburban estate, and his brand-new luxury boat. He loved to give Trey advice on how to manage a career-driven wife like me. What Andre did not know, and what I had kept buried under mountains of non-disclosure agreements, was that his entire wealthy lifestyle was a mirage funded entirely by my pity. 3 years ago, Andre's logistics company was facing absolute bankruptcy. He was days away from losing his home, his business, and his precious social status. To spare my parents the heartbreak of watching their golden boy fail, I used one of my venture capital firm's shell companies to quietly inject $2 million into his failing enterprise. I bought his debt. I held the silent equity on his company. I essentially owned the roof over his head. I grabbed my keys and headed down to my waiting car. My driver navigated the sleek black sedan out of the city and toward the affluent suburbs where Andre and his wife Lauren lived. I sat in the back seat watching the trees blur past the tinted windows. I felt no anxiety. My heart beat with a steady and clinical precision. For 35 years, I had played the obedient sister, the quiet daughter, and the supportive wife. I had shrunk myself to make them comfortable. I had funded their delusions of grandeur. Today, the Bank of Kendra was officially permanently closed. The car pulled up to Andre's massive driveway. The street was lined with expensive cars belonging to their carefully curated social circle. I stepped out of the vehicle, smoothing the lapels of my emerald suit, and walked toward the sound of 90s rhythm and blues floating from the backyard. I did not knock. I walked through the side gate and stepped directly onto the pristine stone patio. The backyard was packed with people holding red plastic cups and plates of barbecue. And right there, holding court by the massive outdoor grill, was Trey. He was wearing a designer polo shirt I had paid for, laughing loudly with my brother. Standing right beside him, holding a mimosa and trying desperately to look like she belonged, was Vanessa. My family had actually welcomed my husband's 28-year-old mistress into their home less than a week after he served me with divorce papers. My heels clicked sharply against the stone patio. One by one, conversations died down. People turned to look at me. The music seemed to fade into the background as Trey caught sight of me. His laughter evaporated instantly. His grip on his beer bottle tightened, and his eyes darted nervously toward my brother. Vanessa shifted her weight, crossing her arms and attempting to look defiant, though her wide eyes betrayed a deep and unmistakable panic. Before Trey or Andre could speak, Lauren spotted me. Lauren was Andre's white wife, a woman who prided herself on being an ally while constantly delivering the most breathtaking microaggressions disguised as sisterly concern. She hurried over to me, her face arranged in a mask of exaggerated performative sympathy. She reached out to touch my arm, but I subtly stepped out of her reach. "Kendra, sweetie," Lauren cooed, her voice pitched perfectly so the surrounding guests could hear her graciousness. "I am so glad you decided to come. We were all just so worried about you. This whole situation is just a mess, but we wanted to make sure you felt included. Family is family after all." I looked at her, keeping my expression perfectly composed. "Thank you, Lauren. That is very generous of you, especially considering my husband brought his mistress to your family event." Lauren sighed, leaning in closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Now, Kendra, you have to be reasonable. Trey is going through a lot right now. His pride is wounded. You taking all the furniture out of the house was a bit vindictive, do not you think? You know how black men need to feel respected in their own homes. Trey just needed a woman who supported his excellence instead of constantly competing with it. Vanessa makes him feel like a provider. You could learn a little something from this for your next relationship." I stared at this woman, absolutely marveling at her audacity. She was standing in a backyard I secretly paid for, drinking wine bought with money I secretly provided, telling me I needed to learn how to let a man be a provider. It was so profoundly ridiculous that I actually let out a soft and genuine laugh. Lauren blinked, clearly confused by my reaction. "I'm glad you can find the humor in this," she said stiffly. "But Andre and I really want to help mediate this. We want everyone to just talk it out peacefully." "Oh, we are going to talk, Lauren," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet patio. "I promise you, by the end of the day, everyone is going to understand exactly how providers operate." I walked past her, ignoring her confused sputtering, and headed straight toward the grill where Andre and Trey were standing. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. Andre puffed out his chest as I approached, sliding into his designated role as the protective patriarch of the family. He held a pair of stainless steel grilling tongs like a weapon. "Kendra, you need to keep it civil today," Andre warned, pointing his tongs at me. "Trey is a guest in my home. We are not doing the bitter ex-wife routine at my barbecue. You need to respect my property." I looked at Andre, then at Trey, and finally at Vanessa, who was hiding slightly behind Trey's broad shoulders. I took a deep breath, smelling the smoke from the grill and the heavy scent of impending destruction. "Your property," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the humid Atlanta air. "That is a very interesting choice of words, Andre. It is especially interesting considering how much you have been bragging to your friends today about this new outdoor kitchen and that luxury speedboat parked in the driveway." Andre frowned, his posture stiffening. "I worked hard for those things. I provide for my family." I smiled warmly, turning to address the crowd of guests who were now watching us with bated breath. "He does work hard, everyone. But let us be completely honest about who actually paid for this beautiful kitchen and that wonderful boat. It is so hard for small logistics companies to stay afloat these days. That is why 3 years ago, when Andre was secretly facing total bankruptcy and foreclosure, my venture capital firm stepped in. I fully funded this house renovation. I bought that boat to keep up his appearances. I own the debt on his business. I funded his entire lifestyle out of pure pity." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several of Andre's wealthy friends exchanged shocked whispers. Lauren dropped her mimosa glass onto the patio, the glass shattering loudly against the stone. Andre turned an alarming shade of gray. "You shut your mouth!" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound humiliation. "You are lying. You are just trying to embarrass me because your husband left you." "I am not embarrassed at all," I said evenly, pulling a folded legal document from my blazer pocket and placing it directly on the grill's side table. "There's the proxy agreement. Read it yourself. I have been paying your mortgage for 36 months, Andre. You are not a provider. You are a dependent." Trey stepped forward, trying to salvage his own shattered pride by attacking mine. "You see what I mean," Trey announced to the crowd, pointing a finger at me. "This is why I had to leave her. She is toxic. She tries to emasculate every man she comes across. She cannot stand to see black men succeeding. That is why I am taking my talents and my firm to the top without her." As Trey puffed out his chest, attempting to rally the crowd back to his side, a loud, heavy beeping sound interrupted him. Beep, beep, beep. Everyone turned their heads toward the front of the house. A massive, heavy-duty tow truck was violently backing into the driveway. It was not there for Andre's luxury boat. The driver was backing up directly toward the gleaming $150,000 Porsche that Trey had driven to the party. The mechanical warning beep of the tow truck cut through the stunned silence of the backyard like a metronome, counting down the final seconds of my husband's ego. Everyone stood frozen, watching the heavy-duty vehicle maneuver expertly into my brother's pristine driveway. Its flashing amber lights reflected off the flawless jet-black paint of the Porsche 911. The exact same Porsche Trey had used to drive his mistress to a family barbecue. For a moment, Trey just stared. His brain simply could not process the visual of a blue-collar worker in high-visibility safety gear, preparing to hoist his ultimate status symbol onto a flatbed. Then panic set in. Trey dropped his plate of food right onto Andre's expensive stone patio. The ceramic shattered, sending potato salad and grilled ribs across the ground, but Trey did not even notice. He sprinted across the manicured lawn, his arms waving wildly in the air. Hey, what are you doing? Trey screamed, his voice cracking as he reached the driveway. Put that down. You have the wrong house. You cannot touch that car. I own that car. The tow truck driver, a burly man who looked like he had dealt with 1,000 angry men, just like Trey, did not even flinch. He calmly stepped out of the cab holding a metal clipboard. He checked the license plate, then checked his paperwork. I have a repossession order for a Porsche 911, registered to Vanguard Estates, the driver said, his voice flat and bored. The vehicle identification number matches perfectly. Step back, buddy. I am just doing my job. I am the chief executive officer, Trey yelled, practically foaming at the mouth. I am a partner at a top-tier consulting firm. That is my personal vehicle. I make the payments. You are making a massive mistake, and I am going to sue your entire towing company into the ground. The guests from the barbecue had migrated to the edge of the lawn, clutching their drinks, watching the spectacle unfold. My brother Andre stood paralyzed by the grill, his jaw tight. Lauren, who just minutes ago had told me to support my husband's black excellence, was now hiding her face behind her hand. She was completely mortified that this loud, chaotic drama was playing out in front of her country club friends. I took a slow, deliberate breath and walked out from the patio, my emerald green blazer catching the late afternoon sun. I did not rush. I walked with the measured, steady pace of a woman who held absolutely all the cards. Actually, Trey, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the rumble of the diesel engine. You do not make the payments. Vanguard Estates makes the payments, and you are definitely not a chief executive officer. Trey spun around his chest, heaving his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and terror. Kendra, call this off right now, he demanded, trying to lower his voice so the neighbors would not hear, though it was far too late for that. This is my car. You cannot just take it because you are having a bitter moment. I walked right past him and approached the tow truck driver. I pulled a sleek black leather folder from my bag and handed it to the man. I am the primary shareholder of Vanguard Estates, I told the driver smoothly. Here is the original corporate lease, the title of ownership, and the emergency repossession authorization. The vehicle was assigned to this man as a corporate perk. However, company policy strictly prohibits the use of corporate assets to transport unauthorized personnel. I gestured dismissively toward Vanessa, who was hovering near the edge of the grass, looking terrified. Therefore, his corporate perk has been permanently revoked. The driver quickly reviewed the documents, nodded respectfully, and handed the folder back to me. Everything is in order, ma'am. He turned to Trey. You heard the lady. Step away from the vehicle. It is going on the truck right now. Trey looked like he was going to be physically sick. The facade he had spent a decade building, the image of the wealthy, self-made titan of industry, was being dismantled piece by piece in front of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. Vanessa, sensing the absolute catastrophe, trotted over in her designer heels. Trey, do something, she whined, tugging on his arm. All my overnight bags are in the trunk. My expensive makeup is in the glove compartment. Tell him to stop. I turned to look at Vanessa. She looked so small, so entirely out of her depth. She thought she had stolen a king, but she had merely abducted a court jester. The driver paused, his hand on the hydraulic lever. I have to secure the vehicle, he said loudly. If there are personal items inside, you have exactly 60 seconds to remove them before I lift it off the ground. Vanessa shrieked. She scrambled toward the back of the Porsche, popping the trunk and frantically grabbing her knockoff designer bags. She had to lean her upper body entirely into the trunk to gather her scattered items, her heels slipping awkwardly on the concrete driveway. She looked ridiculous. She looked frantic. And she was doing it all while 30 wealthy suburbanites watched her in absolute judgmental silence. Trey stood there completely emasculated. He looked at Andre for help, desperately hoping my older brother would step in and defend him. But Andre was staring at his shoes. Andre could not save Trey because I had just exposed that Andre could barely save himself. I looked at my older brother, remembering all the times my parents praised him for simply managing to wake up and go to work. They always called him the man of the house. They told me I needed to follow his example, to be more traditional, to soften my edges, so I would not intimidate men. They told me my 80-hour work weeks were unnatural for a woman. Yet here was the golden boy, the man of the house completely paralyzed. He knew that his mortgage, his boat, and his entire social standing relied on the mercy of the sister he had just called a bitter woman in a family group chat. The barbecue was officially over. The guests were already doing the awkward shuffle, setting their red plastic cups down on tables and whispering to their spouses that it was time to leave. Lauren was practically in tears, her perfect Sunday gathering ruined by the undeniable reality that she had married a dependent, not a provider. The hydraulic lift whined loudly as the Porsche was hoisted up and secured onto the flatbed. The driver climbed into the cab, gave me a polite nod, and drove away. The massive truck rumbled down the pristine suburban street, taking Trey's remaining dignity right along with it. Trey stood in the empty driveway, his hands balled into tight fists. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He glared at me with a hatred so pure it practically vibrated in the humid air. "You think you are so smart, Kendra?" He spat, his voice trembling with venom. "You think stripping me of a car means you won? You are nothing but a jealous, miserable woman who cannot handle the fact that I outgrew you." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just stood there looking at a man who was actively drowning in his own delusions. "I do not need you," Trey continued, his voice rising desperately, trying to project strength for Vanessa and the few guests still lingering near the gate. "I do not need your fake corporate staging companies. I do not need your cars. You are just a stepping stone. I am a partner at Apex Consulting. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I am sitting down in the boardroom and I am closing a multi-million-dollar acquisition deal. I am getting a massive payout and a huge equity bump. I am going straight to the top and you are going to be left down here completely alone." He grabbed Vanessa's hand, yanking her toward the street to call a rideshare, desperately trying to salvage whatever pride he had left. He thought his job was his sanctuary. He thought Apex Consulting was his safe harbor, the one place where he was the undisputed king of his domain. I watched him storm down the sidewalk, dragging his mistress and her cheap luggage behind him. I adjusted the lapel of my emerald green blazer, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "See you at the office, Trey," I whispered into the quiet afternoon air. He did not hear me, but it did not matter in the slightest. He was about to learn the final, most devastating truth about his carefully constructed reality. He thought he was a self-made executive. He thought he was closing the biggest deal of his professional life. What Trey did not know was that the corporate guillotine was already polished, sharpened, and waiting for him right in the middle of that boardroom. Monday morning in downtown Atlanta brought the kind of suffocating humidity that makes the air feel heavy. But as I stepped into the air-conditioned lobby of the Apex Consulting high-rise, I felt completely weightless. I was wearing a pristine, tailored white suit, a deliberate choice. White is the color of a clean slate of absolute clarity and of surrender. Today I was going to force my husband to surrender every last delusion he had about his own adequacy. I took the private executive elevator up to the 40th floor. The sleek glass doors of the boardroom were already propped open. The representatives from the Sterling Investment Group were seated along the right side of the massive mahogany table reviewing their term sheets. These were serious men, billionaires in their own right, looking to acquire a promising consulting firm. I greeted them warmly, shook their hands, and took my seat directly at the head of the table. I arranged my leather portfolio in front of me and waited. At precisely 9 o'clock, Trey swaggered into the boardroom. He was wearing one of the few cheap suits he had managed to salvage from the house before my team locked it down. Despite the disastrous weekend, he had managed to paste his arrogant mask back onto his face. He walked into that room fully believing he was a titan of industry. He believed this multi-million-dollar acquisition deal was going to be his saving grace. He thought the payout would buy him a new luxury car, a new penthouse, and the permanent admiration of his 28-year-old mistress. Trey tossed his briefcase onto the table, a wide, charismatic smile spreading across his face as he turned to greet the investors. Then his eyes traveled to the head of the table. His smile vanished so fast, it looked like it was violently ripped from his face. He froze, his hand still resting on the handle of his briefcase. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking ashy and hollow. "Kendra," he breathed the word, barely making it past his lips. What are you doing here? I leaned back in the high-backed leather executive chair, resting my hands neatly in my lap. I am here to close the deal, Trey. Please take a seat. We have a lot of ground to cover. Trey's shock quickly morphed into a desperate, frantic anger. He looked at the investors, then back at me, his chest heaving as he tried to maintain his alpha male persona in front of an audience. This is highly inappropriate, Trey barked, his voice rising in panic. He slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. I do not know how you got past security, but this is a closed corporate meeting. You are my bitter soon-to-be ex-wife, and you have absolutely no business being in this building. I am closing a major acquisition today. He reached over to the sleek intercom sitting in the center of the table and slammed his finger on the button for the front desk. Sarah, get building security in the main boardroom immediately, Trey demanded into the speaker. I have an unauthorized intruder who needs to be escorted off the premises right now. I did not stop him. I did not raise my voice. I simply watched him flail, letting him dig his own grave as deep as he possibly could. The investors from the Sterling Group shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging knowing glances with one another. They did not say a word to defend him. Less than a minute later, the heavy glass doors swung open. Two large security guards stepped into the boardroom looking serious and ready for a physical altercation. Remove this woman from my boardroom, Trey commanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. She is trespassing. The lead security guard looked at Trey, then looked at me. He did not move a single muscle toward my chair. Instead, I calmly opened my leather portfolio and pulled out a single embossed sheet of paper. I slid it across the long table until it stopped right in front of Trey. Actually, gentlemen, I said, addressing the security guards with a polite smile. Please stand by. You are going to be needed to escort a terminated employee out of the building. Trey let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Terminated employee. I am the managing partner of this firm. I am the chief executive officer. You have completely lost your mind. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the document sitting in front of him. Read the corporate charter, Trey. Read the ownership structure of Apex Consulting. Trey snatched the paper off the table. I watched his eyes scan the legal jargon. I watched the exact moment his brain finally comprehended the words printed on the page. His hands began to shake so violently, the paper rattled in his grip. Apex Consulting is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Ventures, I explained, making sure my voice carried clearly across the silent room. Vanguard Ventures is my private equity firm. I bought this distressed consulting agency 4 years ago when it was facing bankruptcy. I installed you as the managing director and gave you a fabricated chief executive title because your fragile ego required a fancy business card. You own absolutely zero equity in this company. You hold 0 shares. You are a salaried W-2 employee and you always have been. Trey looked up from the paper, his eyes wide and wild with denial. He looked at the Sterling Group investors, desperately seeking some kind of male solidarity. Tell her she is crazy, Trey pleaded with the lead investor. We have been negotiating this buyout for 6 months. I built this portfolio. I brought you this deal. You are buying my company. The lead investor, an older man with silver hair and a notoriously ruthless reputation, slowly closed his laptop. We have been negotiating with Vanguard Ventures for 6 months, Trey, the investor, said coldly. You were simply the account manager facilitating the presentations. Our legal team has been dealing directly with your wife's attorneys since day one. We do not do business with men who do not own their own paper. Trey stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a leather chair. His breathing was shallow and erratic. The illusion of his power, the entire foundation of his self-worth, was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of him. He had spent his entire marriage mocking my late-night conference calls, telling his friends I was just playing business on my laptop while he was the one bringing home the bacon. He had no idea I was the one signing his paychecks. I am not finished, I said, pulling a thick, bright red binder from my bag and dropping it onto the table with a heavy thud. I opened the binder, revealing hundreds of pages of highlighted bank statements and receipts. As the primary shareholder of this firm, I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of your corporate expense accounts, I told him, my tone shifting into pure, unadulterated corporate authority. Over the last 8 months, you have charged over $40,000 in luxury hotel suites, expensive dinners, and designer jewelry to this company. You used my corporate funds to finance your affair with a 28-year-old woman. Trey tried to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled sound came out of his throat. That is not just a violation of your employment contract, Trey. That is gross financial misconduct and corporate embezzlement. I continued closing the red binder. Effective immediately, you are terminated for cause. You are stripped of your title, your salary, your corporate health insurance, and your severance package. I looked up at the 2 security guards standing by the door. Please escort him to his desk to collect his personal items and then remove him from the premises. Trey looked at me completely broken. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a freight train he never saw coming. He tried to take a step toward me, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Kendra, please," he whispered, tears suddenly welling up in his eyes. "Do not do this. We can talk about this. I will pay it back. I will leave Vanessa. Just let me keep my job. Please, I have nothing else." I stared at him, feeling absolutely no sympathy, no anger, and no lingering trace of the love I once had for him. I felt nothing but a clinical emptiness. "You told me to pack my personal belongings and leave Trey. I suggest you do the same." The security guard stepped forward, grabbing Trey firmly by the arms. They did not give him a chance to argue. They marched him out of the glass boardroom and down the main hallway of the office. I stood by the door and watched the walk of shame. It was glorious. Every analyst, every assistant, and every receptionist in the open plan office stopped typing. They all stood up in their cubicles, watching in dead silence as the arrogant, demanding boss who had terrorized them for years was frog-marched toward the service elevator. A security guard handed him a single flimsy cardboard box containing a generic coffee mug, a stress ball, and a framed photo of himself. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the boardroom and looked down at the busy Atlanta street below. A few minutes later, Trey emerged onto the sidewalk. He was holding his little cardboard box, looking completely lost in the midday heat. He had no luxury car waiting for him. He had no mansion to return to. He had no corporate credit card to buy his mistress a peace offering. He was entirely stripped bare. As I watched him pull out his cell phone, my own phone began to ring inside my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a call from his mother, Evelyn. I let it go to voicemail, waiting for the inevitable notification to pop up. A minute later, the audio message arrived. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. Kendra Evelyn's voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with righteous religious fury. "I do not know what kind of demonic spirit has taken hold of you, but you are destroying a good black man's legacy. You have humiliated my son, and you have failed in your duties as a wife. I want you at my church in my office at 6 o'clock this evening for a family reckoning. You are going to answer for what you have done." I deleted the voicemail and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I snapped my briefcase shut, a genuine smile playing on my lips. Evelyn thought she could summon me to her megachurch to shame me into submission. She thought her title as the church matriarch gave her authority over my life. She had no idea that the Bank of Kendra funded her illusions too. I never pass up an invitation to church, especially when I am bringing the exact receipts needed to tear down the temple. Monday morning in Midtown Atlanta brought a heavy, suffocating humidity. But as I stepped out of my chauffeured car and looked up at the towering glass and steel structure of the Apex Consulting high-rise, I felt absolutely weightless. I chose my outfit for the day with careful, deliberate precision. I wore a tailored, deep crimson suit. Red is the color of a final warning. It is the color of a stop sign. And today, I was going to bring my husband's entire fictional reality to a permanent and devastating halt. I bypassed the main reception desk and walked directly to the private executive elevator. I scanned my master access keycard. The door slid open silently, whisking me up to the 42nd floor. This was the floor Trey proudly told everyone he commanded. He loved to bring friends here, showing off the panoramic views of the city, gesturing to the busy analysts in their cubicles, and pretending he was the mastermind behind every successful campaign. The truth was far less glamorous. 4 years ago, Apex Consulting was a failing no-name agency drowning in debt. Trey had just been hired as a mid-level manager, and he was terrified the company would fold before he could put the job on his resume. To protect his pride, I used my venture capital firm to quietly purchase the distressed agency. I absorbed their debt, restructured their operations, and installed Trey as the managing partner. I gave him a bloated salary, a massive corner office, and a title that looked great on a business card. But he owned absolutely zero equity. He was a salaried employee playing in a sandbox I built, and today I was taking the toys away. The sleek glass doors of the main boardroom were already propped open when I arrived. The acquisition team from Horizon Capital was seated along the right side of the massive mahogany table. These were serious, heavy-hitting investors looking to acquire a profitable consulting firm to add to their portfolio. I had authorized this buyout 6 months ago. Trey believed he had brokered the deal all by himself. He thought he was the architect of the buyout, completely unaware that his emails, his term sheets, and his presentations were all secretly being reviewed and approved by my legal team before they ever reached Horizon Capital. I walked into the boardroom, greeted the investors warmly, and shook hands with Harrison, the lead acquisition director. We exchanged pleasantries, and I took my seat directly at the head of the table. I arranged my leather portfolio in front of me, folded my hands, and waited for the show to begin. At precisely 9:00, Trey swaggered through the boardroom doors. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit. It was one of the few cheap off-the-rack suits he had managed to salvage from his trunk after my repossession team cleared out our mansion. Despite his disastrous and humiliating weekend, he had somehow managed to paste his arrogant alpha male mask back onto his face. He walked into that room fully believing he was a self-made titan of industry. He genuinely believed this multi-million-dollar acquisition deal was going to be his saving grace. He thought the massive payout he was expecting today would buy him a new luxury car, a new high-rise condo, and the permanent admiration of his young mistress. Trey tossed his leather briefcase onto the polished table, a wide, charismatic smile spreading across his face as he turned to greet the investors. He opened his mouth to deliver his usual slick morning greeting. Then his eyes traveled to the head of the table. His smile vanished so fast it looked like it was violently ripped from his face. He froze mid-step, his hand still resting on the brass handle of his briefcase. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking ashy and completely hollow. His jaw went slack. "Kendra." He breathed the word, barely making it past his lips. "What are you doing here?" I leaned back in the high-backed leather executive chair, resting my hands neatly in my lap. "I am here to close the deal, Trey. Please take a seat. We have a lot of ground to cover this morning." Trey's shock quickly morphed into a desperate, frantic anger. The realization that I had infiltrated his sacred professional sanctuary pushed him over the edge. He looked at the investors, then back at me, his chest heaving as he tried to maintain his authority in front of an audience. "This is highly inappropriate," Trey barked, his voice rising in panic. He slammed his hand down on the mahogany table, trying to project dominance. "I do not know how you got past the lobby security, but this is a closed corporate meeting. You are my bitter soon-to-be ex-wife, and you have absolutely no business being in this building. I am closing a major acquisition today, and you are trying to ruin it out of spite." He reached over to the sleek intercom sitting in the center of the table and slammed his finger on the button for the front desk. "Sarah, get building security in the main boardroom immediately." Trey demanded into the speaker, his voice shaking with rage. "I have an unauthorized intruder who needs to be escorted off the premises right now. She is unstable and she is trespassing." I did not stop him. I did not raise my voice or defend myself against his ridiculous accusations. I simply sat there and watched him flail. I let him dig his own grave as deep as he possibly could. The investors from Horizon Capital shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging knowing, almost pitying glances with one another. They did not say a single word to defend him. Less than a minute later, the heavy glass doors swung open. 2 large, broad-shouldered security guards stepped into the boardroom looking serious and ready to handle a physical altercation. "Remove this woman from my boardroom," Trey commanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. She is disrupting a confidential financial negotiation. Get her out of here. The lead security guard looked at Trey, then looked calmly at me. He did not move a single muscle toward my chair. Instead, I slowly opened my leather portfolio and pulled out a single thick, embossed sheet of paper. I slid it across the long table until it stopped right in front of Trey's briefcase. "Actually, gentlemen," I said, addressing the security guards with a polite, even smile, "please stand by the door. You are going to be needed to escort a terminated employee out of the building shortly." Trey let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He looked at the security guards as if they were idiots. "Terminated employee. I am the managing partner of this firm. I am the chief executive officer. You have completely lost your mind, Kendra. You cannot fire the owner of the company." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the document sitting in front of him. "Read the corporate charter, Trey. Read the ownership structure of Apex Consulting. Read the signature at the bottom of the page." Trey hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the paper. He snatched the document off the table. I watched his eyes scan the heavy legal jargon. I watched the exact moment his brain finally comprehended the words printed on the page. His hands began to shake so violently, the heavy paper rattled audibly in his grip. He read it again, his lips moving silently, unable to process the absolute destruction of his reality. "Apex Consulting is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Ventures," I explained, making sure my voice carried clearly and coldly across the silent room. "Vanguard Ventures is my private equity firm. I bought this distressed consulting agency 4 years ago when it was facing total liquidation. I absorbed the debt, I installed you as the managing director, and I gave you a fabricated chief executive title because your fragile ego required a fancy business card to feel like a real man. You own absolutely zero equity in this company. You hold 0 shares. You are a salaried employee, and you always have been." Trey looked up from the paper, his eyes wide and wild with denial. He looked at the Horizon Capital investors, desperately seeking some kind of male solidarity. He wanted them to tell him this was a joke. "Tell her she is crazy," Trey pleaded, looking directly at Harrison. "We have been negotiating this buyout for 6 months. I built this portfolio. I brought you this deal. You are buying my company. Tell her she cannot do this." Harrison, the silver-haired acquisition director, slowly closed his laptop and folded his hands on the table. He looked at Trey with absolute disdain. "We have been negotiating with Vanguard Ventures for 6 months, Trey Harrison said, his voice completely void of sympathy. "You were simply the account manager facilitating the slide deck presentations. Our legal team has been dealing directly with your wife's attorneys since day one. We do not do business with men who do not own their own paper. You are just a middleman." Trey stumbled backward, his hip hitting the edge of a heavy leather chair. His breathing was shallow and erratic. The illusion of his immense power, the entire foundation of his self-worth, was shattering into a million irreparable pieces right in front of him. He had spent his entire marriage mocking my late-night conference calls. He had told his friends and his mistress that I was just playing business on my laptop, while he was the one out in the world bringing home the real money. He had no idea I was the one signing his paychecks every 2 weeks. He was nothing but an employee in an empire I built from scratch. "I am not finished," I said, reaching back into my bag. I pulled out a thick, bright red binder and dropped it onto the table. The heavy thud echoed loudly in the quiet room. I opened the binder, revealing hundreds of pages of highlighted bank statements, corporate credit card receipts, and hotel invoices. "As the primary shareholder of this firm, I ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of your corporate expense accounts over the weekend," I told him, my tone shifting into pure, unadulterated corporate authority. "I wanted to see exactly how you were representing my company. Over the last 8 months, you have charged over $40,000 in luxury hotel suites, expensive dinners, and designer jewelry to this firm. You used my corporate funds to finance your affair with Vanessa." Trey tried to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled sound came out of his throat. He looked at the red binder like it was a live explosive. "That is not just a violation of your employment contract, Trey. That is gross financial misconduct and corporate embezzlement." I continued, closing the red binder with a sharp snap. "Effective immediately, the board is officially terminating you for cause. You are stripped of your title, your salary, your corporate health insurance, and any potential severance package. You are fired. You. Trey turned his desperate gaze away from my face and looked directly at the investors sitting along the right side of the mahogany table. He was practically vibrating with panic, searching for a lifeline and escape hatch, or any shred of male solidarity he could cling to. He locked eyes with Harrison, the lead acquisition director from Horizon Capital, a man Trey had spent the last 6 months trying to impress over expensive steak dinners and rounds of golf that I had unknowingly paid for. Harrison, listen to me. Trey pleaded, his voice taking on a forced, jovial tone that sounded entirely hysterical in the quiet room. You know how this goes, man. You know how women get when they are emotional and going through a divorce. She is just trying to embarrass me. She is trying to ruin my livelihood over a domestic dispute. Do not let her kill this massive deal just because her feelings are hurt. We are men of business. We honor the code. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Not a single investor nodded. Not a single man offered him a sympathetic smile. Harrison slowly stood up. He did not look angry, which somehow made it worse. He looked entirely indifferent. He clicked the golden latches of his leather briefcase shut, and the sound echoed like a judge striking a gavel. There is no deal to kill, Trey. Harrison said, his voice flat and perfectly composed. The deal is already done. Horizon Capital signed the final acquisition paperwork with Vanguard Ventures at 7 o'clock this morning. We are only here right now as a courtesy to meet the new operational staff, which apparently no longer includes you. Harrison buttoned his suit jacket, turned his back on my husband, and extended a firm hand toward me. A pleasure doing business with you, Kendra, Harrison said respectfully. We look forward to the transition. The pleasure is all mine, Harrison, I replied, shaking his hand. My team will send over the updated executive roster by noon. One by one, the 4 other investors stood up, gathered their belongings, and filed out of the glass boardroom without so much as a second glance at Trey. They respected power. They respected capital. Trey had neither. He was just a loud, empty vessel who had mistakenly believed that proximity to wealth was the same thing as possessing it. As the heavy glass doors swung shut behind the investors, Trey was left standing completely alone at the side of the table. His chest was heaving. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down around him, suffocating him in real time. He looked at the thick red binder sitting in front of me, the one detailing every single fraudulent charge he had made on my company dime. Kendra, you cannot do this, he stammered, stepping toward the table, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. I will pay back the $40,000. I swear to you, I will sell the Porsche today. I will give you every dime. Just let me keep my job. I have nothing else. I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over my spirit. Vanguard Estates owns the Porsche, Trey, I reminded him softly. You cannot sell a car you do not own. You cannot pay me back with my own money. And you certainly cannot keep a job at a company where you just committed corporate embezzlement. I opened the red binder and flipped to a page I had bookmarked. I read the items aloud, letting the words fill the air. A $4,000 weekend at the Waldorf Astoria with Vanessa. A $12,000 Cartier bracelet, the exact same bracelet I saw her wearing at my brother's barbecue yesterday. Countless charges for high-end champagne, private dining rooms, and luxury car services. You did not just cheat on your wife, Trey. You stole from your employer. You stole from me. I looked up at the 2 broad-shouldered security guards who were still standing dutifully by the door. You have your orders, gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a woman who owned the building. Escort him to his desk. Give him exactly 5 minutes to collect his personal items, and then remove him from the property. The guards stepped forward immediately. They grabbed Trey by the arms, their grips tight and unyielding. Trey did not fight them. All the fight had been drained out of him. His shoulders slumped, his head dropped, and he allowed himself to be marched out of the glass boardroom. I stood up and walked to the doorway, watching the procession move down the main hallway of the Apex consulting floor. It was a spectacle I had waited a decade to witness. The open plan office was normally buzzing with the sounds of ringing phones and frantic typing, but right now it was dead silent. Every single junior analyst, every administrative assistant and every department head stood up in their cubicles. They watched in absolute awe as their arrogant, demanding boss was Frog marched toward his office. Trey had terrorized these employees for years. He had belittled them in meetings, stolen credit for their late-night research, and threatened their jobs whenever his fragile ego felt threatened. Now they watched him pack a generic coffee mug, a stress ball, and a cheap framed photo of himself into a flimsy cardboard box. No one offered him a box of tissues. No one offered to help him carry his things. They simply watched the tyrant fall. I walked back into the boardroom and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the bustling Atlanta skyline. The morning sun was beating down on the concrete below. I thought about all the nights I had stood by the window in our mansion, exhausted to my very bones. I remembered the countless times I had stayed awake until 3 in the morning, quietly negotiating overseas venture capital contracts so the sound of my voice would not wake him. Trey would frequently roll over in his sleep, glare at me, and tell me to shut my laptop. He used to mock my dedication. He would tell me that I was just playing business, that my little consulting hobby was cute, but I needed to focus on being a traditional wife to a rising corporate star. He would complain that I did not cook him a hot breakfast before his big meetings, completely oblivious to the fact that my late-night negotiations were the only reason he had a job to go to the next morning. He slept soundly in a custom bed I paid for in a mansion I owned while resenting the very ambition that kept a roof over his head. I looked down at the street level 42 floors below. A few minutes later, the glass doors of the lobby opened. The security guards escorted Trey out onto the hot, unforgiving pavement. They handed him his pathetic little cardboard box and pointed him away from the building. Trey stood on the curb, completely isolated. He had no luxury vehicle waiting for him in the executive garage. He had no corporate credit card to hail a premium rideshare. He was just a man standing in the blistering Georgia heat with a box of office supplies. I watched him reach into his pocket with his free hand and pull out his cell phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing the device to his ear. He was desperate. He was looking for a soft place to land. At that exact moment, my own personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the mahogany table behind me. I turned around, picked up the device, and looked at the caller identification. It was not Trey. It was his mother, Patricia. I let the phone ring, the sound echoing sharply in the empty boardroom. I knew exactly what was happening. Trey was standing on the curb crying to his mommy, spinning a wild, victimized tale about how his cruel, bitter wife had ambushed him at work and ruined his career. Patricia, a woman who believed her son was God's greatest gift to the earth, was calling to demand answers. The ringing stopped immediately, followed by the chime of a new voicemail. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear, listening to the shrill, indignant voice of my mother-in-law, Kendra. Patricia hissed through the speaker, her voice trembling with righteous religious fury. I do not know what kind of demonic spirit has taken hold of your heart, but you have gone entirely too far. You are destroying a good black man's legacy out of pure spite. You have failed in your duties as a wife, and now you are acting like a wild animal. I want you at my church in my private office at 6 o'clock this evening for a family reckoning. You are going to answer to me and the elders for what you have done today. The voicemail clicked off. I lowered the phone, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Patricia thought she could summon me to her megachurch to shame me into submission. She thought her title as a respected church matriarch gave her the moral high ground and the authority to discipline me like a disobedient child. She believed she held the power to destroy my reputation in our community. She had absolutely no idea that the Bank of Kendra funded her illusions too. I picked up my briefcase, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. I never pass up an invitation to church, especially when I am bringing the exact financial receipts needed to tear down the entire temple. I told my driver to take me directly to Greater Hope Fellowship. The late afternoon Atlanta traffic was thick, but I used the time in the back of the sedan to gather my thoughts and organize the documents in my leather briefcase. Evelyn treated that megachurch like her own personal kingdom. She was the head of the Community Outreach Board, a woman who wore oversized hats and impeccable tailored suits, dispensing harsh judgment tightly disguised as Christian prayer. She thrived on respectability politics, completely obsessed with how our family appeared to the congregation. I walked through the massive glass double doors of the church vestibule. The evening choir practice was happening somewhere deep inside the sanctuary, sending a faint hum of gospel music through the walls. But the lobby itself was eerily empty, save for a very specific and highly choreographed welcoming committee. Evelyn stood dead center on the polished marble floor. She was wearing a crisp lilac suit with a matching silk scarf, her arms crossed firmly over her chest. Flanking her on either side were three of the most senior church elders, older men in dark suits, who looked at me with an expression of profound theatrical disappointment. Evelyn had clearly rallied her troops. She wanted an audience to witness her putting her rebellious daughter-in-law back in her place. Kendra Evelyn boomed her voice, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. She used her best preaching cadence designed to command absolute authority. I prayed the Lord would soften your hardened heart before you did something you could not take back. But I see the devil of pride has completely taken hold of your spirit. I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping my posture relaxed and perfectly straight. Hello, Evelyn. I received your voicemail. You said you wanted a family reckoning. I am here. You are destroying a good black man's legacy, she declared, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger at me. The church elders nodded solemnly in agreement. You marched into his place of business and humiliated him. You stripped his home bare. And for what? Because his eyes wandered. Men stumble, Kendra. The world is hard on our men, and sometimes they seek comfort where they should not. A strong, praying wife guides her husband back home. She does not tear down the house with her own two hands out of spite. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the mental gymnastics required to justify her son moving a 28-year-old mistress into my house. You failed in your most basic duties as a wife. Evelyn continued gaining momentum as she played to her audience of elders. You were too busy staring at your computer screens and playing corporate boss to nurture his spirit. You emasculated him. You drove him into the arms of that young woman. And now you are trying to financially ruin him just to soothe your own bitter ego. You have brought deep shame to this family and to this church community. Elder Thomas, a man I had personally served at Thanksgiving dinners, shook his head slowly. Sister Kendra, the Bible tells us to forgive 70 times 7. You need to humble yourself, return his assets, and seek counseling to repair your marriage. I let the silence hang in the vast vestibule for a long moment. I looked at the elders. I looked at Evelyn, who was standing tall, chest puffed out, fully believing she had just won the moral high ground. She thought she could weaponize her religion and her community, standing to force me into submission. I reached into my leather bag. I did not pull out a Bible. I pulled out a thick black financial ledger and a stack of printed bank statements. Evelyn, you talk a great deal about building legacies and maintaining respectability in this church, I said, my voice carrying a sharp corporate edge that cut right through her theatrical piety. So let us talk about your legacy. Let us talk about the Greater Hope Community Center. Evelyn frowned, her posture stiffening slightly. The community center is the crown jewel of this ministry. My son Trey is the primary benefactor. He has funded our after-school programs and our food drives for the last 5 years. He is a pillar of this community, unlike you. I smiled, opening the black ledger and flipping to a tab marked with a red sticky note. I stepped forward and handed a summary page directly to Elder Thomas. Trey has never donated a single dime to this church, I said clearly. Vanguard Ventures makes an anonymous donation of $300,000 every January to keep the community center afloat. Vanguard Ventures is my company. I am the sole benefactor. Trey simply took the credit at the banquets because I allowed him to, and because you loved parading him around the sanctuary as a wealthy savior. The elders leaned in to look at the paperwork in Elder Thomas's hand. The bank routing numbers were undeniable. Evelyn's face lost a fraction of its color, but she lifted her chin, trying to recover her ground. Well, she stammered, smoothing her silk scarf. The source of the money does not matter. The Lord provided it through our family. It is doing God's work. If only it were actually doing God's work, I replied, turning to the next page in my ledger. That brings me to the second part of this family reckoning. I ordered a full forensic audit of my charitable donations over the weekend. I needed to ensure my corporate funds were being utilized properly before the end of the fiscal quarter. I pulled out a second stack of papers and handed them to the other two elders. According to these financial records, only about half of my $300,000 annual donation actually reaches the after-school programs I announced. The other half has been systematically funneled into a private shell account registered to Evelyn's maiden name. Evelyn gasped loudly, taking a massive step backward. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her voice pitching into genuine panic. "She is fabricating documents to ruin me." I ignored her outburst and kept my eyes on the elders whose faces were rapidly transforming from stern judgment to absolute horror. "You used my corporate charity funds to pay for your luxury cruises, your designer suits, and your private country club memberships," I told her, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final sentence. "That is not just a moral failing, Evelyn. That is tax fraud. That is embezzlement from a non-profit religious organization. I have been quietly covering the shortfalls in the community center's budget for 3 years, so this church would not get flagged for a federal audit. I did it to protect Trey's reputation and your standing in this community." Elder Thomas looked up from the bank statements, his hands shaking slightly. "Sister Evelyn," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What is this? Are these routing numbers attached to your personal accounts?" "I am not finished," I said, snapping the black ledger shut. "Because of your behavior today, and because of your attempts to publicly shame me for your son's infidelity, my protection is officially revoked. Effective immediately, Vanguard Ventures is pulling all funding from the Greater Hope Community Center." "No," Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "You cannot do that. The center will collapse in a month." "It is going to collapse anyway," I stated coldly, "because tomorrow morning, my legal team is submitting this entire forensic audit to the Internal Revenue Service. I have to protect my venture capital firm from your liabilities. You are going to have to stand at that pulpit on Sunday and explain to this congregation why the youth center is shutting down and why the federal government is looking into your designer hats." Evelyn let out a choked, breathless sound. She physically clutched her pearl necklace, her knees actually buckling slightly. The 3 church elders immediately stepped away from her, creating a wide circle of distance, as if she were suddenly contagious. The woman who had tried to excommunicate me from my own life was now facing absolute social and legal ruin. "You reap what you sow, Evelyn," I said, turning my back on her and walking toward the glass double doors. "I suggest you start praying for a very good defense attorney." I walked out of the church and stepped into the cool evening air. I slid into the back of my waiting car, feeling the adrenaline slowly recede, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. I opened my laptop to check my corporate dashboard. Because Trey's phone was still operating on a Vanguard Ventures business plan, my security software mirrored his incoming notifications. A new text message popped up on the screen. It was sent directly to Trey's device. The sender was Vanessa. The message was short, but it carried the weight of an incoming storm. It read, "We need to talk. Now." I sat in the back of my chauffeured car as we glided away from the megachurch, leaving my mother-in-law to face the ruins of her own reputation. The Atlanta city lights blurred past my tinted windows, casting a soft glow across the leather interior. I opened my laptop and placed it on my lap. The Vanguard Ventures corporate dashboard illuminated the dark space. Because Trey was still carrying his company-issued cell phone, I had absolute administrative access to his device. I could see his location, his messages, and his call logs. I watched the blinking red dot of his global positioning system move far away from the upscale manicured neighborhoods of Buckhead. It slowly crawled toward a gritty 24-hour diner on the industrial outskirts of the city. The great self-proclaimed business mogul was currently sitting in a sticky vinyl booth, waiting for the woman he had destroyed our 10-year marriage for. As a standard security protocol for all high-level executive devices, Vanguard phones were equipped with an environmental diagnostic tool to protect against corporate espionage. With 2 clicks on my keyboard, I activated the microphone. The live audio feed streamed clearly through my laptop speakers. I heard the distinct clatter of cheap diner silverware and the low hum of a broken neon sign buzzing outside the window. Then I heard Trey speak. His voice lacked the booming, arrogant confidence he used when he was spending my money. He sounded small, breathless, and entirely desperate. "Vanessa." "Baby, thank you for coming," Trey pleaded. "I know today was crazy. I know things look bad right now. But you have to understand my crazy ex-wife just caught me off guard. She is trying to ruin me because she knows I am destined for greatness. I just need a minute to rebuild my empire. You are my queen. We are going to build a new legacy together. I just need you to be my ride or die while I get my accounts sorted out." The silence that followed his pathetic speech was heavy. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was completely devoid of the sweet, admiring tone she had used while running her hands over my custom velvet sofa just 2 days ago. Her voice was sharp, dripping with absolute disgust. "Ride or die," Vanessa repeated, letting out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Trey, are you actually out of your mind? You dragged me out of a luxury hotel this afternoon because your black card declined. You stood in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton arguing with a front desk clerk while my luggage sat on the floor. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you owned a consulting firm. You told me you bought that mansion. I am going to get it all back," Trey stammered, his voice rising in panic. "I have connections in this city. I know investors. I can start a new firm tomorrow. You do not even own the bed you sleep in." Vanessa snapped, her voice rising loud enough that other patrons in the diner likely turned to stare. "You are a fraud. You are a 40-year-old man who was living off his wife like a dependent child. Do you think I want to sit in a greasy diner eating $5 pancakes with a man who just got fired by his own spouse in front of his entire office? You have absolutely nothing to offer me." "Vanessa, please." Trey begged, the sound of his dignity completely evaporating. "I left my wife for you. I chose you." "You chose me because I made you feel like a big man," Vanessa countered viciously. "But you are not a big man, Trey. You are broke. You are homeless. And you are a walking embarrassment. Do not ever contact me again. Lose my number." I heard the loud scrape of a heavy wooden chair being pushed back across the linoleum floor. I heard the sharp, rapid click of Vanessa walking away in the expensive designer heels that I had indirectly paid for. Trey called her name one last time, a pathetic, wavering sound that went completely unanswered. A moment later, a different voice cut through the audio feed. It was the tired, unsympathetic voice of a late-night diner waitress. "Sir, your total is $14.50, the waitress said flatly. I heard the rustle of fabric as Trey patted down his pockets. He pulled out a card and handed it over. A few seconds later, the waitress returned. "Card declined," she stated. "You got another form of payment, or do I need to call my manager?" I closed my eyes and let a deep, genuine smile spread across my face. Trey, the man who used to order $1,000 bottles of champagne just to impress his golf buddies, could not afford a plate of diner food. I terminated the audio feed, letting the quiet luxury of my town car wash over me. My phone vibrated on the seat next to me. A new text message had arrived on my personal number. I picked it up and looked at the screen. The sender was an unknown number, but the opening line told me exactly who it was. Vanessa had just dumped a broke man, and now, desperate for a soft landing, she was attempting to play the victim. "Kendra," the text read, "I know you probably hate me right now, and you have every right to be angry. But I need you to know that Trey lied to me too. He manipulated me. He told me you two were already separated and that you were emotionally abusive to him. I am so sorry for my part in this. I am a girl's girl, and I would never intentionally destroy a happy home. We are both victims of his narcissistic manipulation. If you want to meet up for coffee and talk, I am here for you." I stared at the screen, genuinely marveling at the pure, unadulterated audacity of this woman. She stood in my kitchen less than 48 hours ago, insulted my interior design choices, and smugly tossed my wedding photo into the garbage can. Now that the bank of Trey was officially closed, she suddenly wanted to bond over shared trauma. I did not type a single word in response. Instead, I opened a secure folder on my phone labeled with her name. When I first suspected Trey was having an affair 6 months ago, I did not cry. I hired the best private investigation firm in the state of Georgia. They provided me with a comprehensive digital footprint of Vanessa. I selected 3 specific screenshots from the file and attached them to the text thread. The first screenshot was a private message Vanessa sent to her best friend 4 months ago. It read, "Trey is totally married, but his wife is a boring corporate drone who works all the time. He buys me whatever I want. I am securing this bag and getting that Buckhead mansion." The second screenshot was a photo Vanessa posted to a private social media story just last week. It showed her wearing a $12,000 Cartier bracelet. The caption read, "When you finally convince the married millionaire to leave his wife for you, blessed." The third screenshot was a copy of the corporate audit showing the exact date and time Trey purchased that bracelet using my company funds right next to a photo of her wearing it. I hit send. I watched the 3 images deliver to her phone. I did not add an explanation. I did not add a witty comeback. I let her own written words completely obliterate her pathetic attempt to play the victim. 5 seconds after the images delivered, I blocked her number permanently. She was no longer a factor in my life. She was simply the trash taking itself out. I turned my attention back to my laptop. The Vanguard corporate dashboard showed a new notification. Trey had just received a voicemail on his company phone. I clicked the audio file to listen. The voice on the recording belonged to Julian, a notoriously aggressive and ethically questionable divorce attorney in Atlanta. Julian was exactly the kind of lawyer a desperate, guilty man would hire. "Trey, it is Julian," the lawyer boomed confidently. "I reviewed the details of your termination today. Do not panic about losing the job or the house. Your wife is a high-net-worth individual, and you are currently destitute. The courts look very unfavorably on a wealthy spouse leaving their partner penniless and homeless regardless of infidelity. We are going to hit her with a massive lawsuit for permanent spousal support. We are going to claim you sacrificed your own career opportunities to support her corporate ambitions. Get some sleep. We have a deposition scheduled for Thursday morning and we are going to tear her apart." The voicemail ended. I slowly closed my laptop, shaking my head at the sheer predictability of greedy men. Trey and his sleazy lawyer thought they had found a brilliant legal loophole. They thought they could paint me as the cold, calculating billionaire who ruthlessly discarded her dependent husband. They actually believed they could force me to pay alimony to the man who cheated on me. What Julian the lawyer did not know, and what Trey had clearly forgotten in his absolute panic, was the paperwork we signed 10 years ago. When Trey and I got married, he was running a struggling tech startup, and I was quietly building my venture capital empire. Trey was so incredibly arrogant back then. He was so convinced he was going to be the next major billionaire that he practically dragged me to a lawyer to sign a prenuptial agreement. He wanted to ensure that when his startup exploded into a global phenomenon, his boring, supportive wife could not touch his massive wealth. I happily signed the document, waiving my right to any of his future assets and strategically inserting clauses that mutually waived any right to spousal support for either party. He signed an ironclad agreement to protect his imaginary wealth, completely unaware that he was permanently locking himself out of my actual fortune. Thursday morning was going to be an absolute masterpiece. I leaned back against the plush leather seats of my car as we pulled into the secure underground garage of my new penthouse building. Trey wanted to play legal games. He wanted to sit in a deposition room and demand my money. I was going to let him sit down, get comfortable, and smile for the record right before I handed his lawyer the final, devastating piece of the puzzle that would guarantee Trey ended up with absolutely nothing but a massive debt to the federal government. The conference room at my legal team's downtown Atlanta office was freezing by design. It kept people alert, and it kept the emotional temperature low. It was Thursday morning, exactly 4 days after I had stripped my husband of his house, his car, and his job. I sat quietly in a high-backed leather chair. My lead counsel, a brilliant African-American woman named Denise, sat beside me arranging her legal pads with clinical precision. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open. Trey walked in, completely failing to hide his nervous energy behind a mask of forced arrogance. He was flanked by Julian, the notoriously aggressive divorce attorney, whose voicemail I had intercepted earlier that week. Julian wore an overly tailored suit that reeked of cheap cologne and desperate ambition. He dropped his thick briefcase onto the polished mahogany table with a loud thud, clearly attempting to establish dominance in the room. Trey took a seat across from me. He smirked, adjusting his cuffs. He actually looked relieved. In his mind, he had finally cornered me. He believed that the law was a weapon he could wield to force me into submission completely, forgetting that I was the one who funded the very lawyers who drafted our life together. Julian did not waste any time with pleasantries. He signaled for the court reporter to begin transcribing, cleared his throat loudly, and launched into a theatrical opening statement. He accused me of severe and systematic financial deception. He pointed a finger at me, claiming I had maliciously hidden billions of dollars in marital assets within a complex web of offshore holding companies and domestic limited liability corporations. He demanded a complete unsealing of Vanguard Ventures and every subsidiary attached to it. He stated for the official record that Trey was entitled to half of my entire empire. Furthermore, Julian demanded permanent indefinite spousal support, claiming I had forced his client to abandon his own highly lucrative entrepreneurial dreams just to manage my businesses. I sat perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with Trey. I let Julian talk for 10 uninterrupted minutes. I let him build a massive, beautiful fantasy for my cheating husband to live in. I watched Trey nod along with every word his lawyer said, his chest puffing out with absolute entitlement. He truly believed he was about to walk out of this room as a newly minted multimillionaire. When Julian finally ran out of breath and sat back in his chair with a smug smile, my lawyer Denise slowly looked up from her notepad. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue with a single point Julian had just made. Instead, Denise calmly opened her briefcase and pulled out a single, impeccably preserved document with original ink signatures. She slid the stapled pages across the smooth mahogany table until they came to a rest directly in front of Julian. While Julian picked up the document and began to read, I kept my eyes locked on Trey. I let my mind drift back exactly 10 years to a warm Saturday afternoon in downtown Atlanta. It was our wedding day. I was wearing a custom white gown, walking down the plush carpeted hallway of a luxury hotel to deliver a gift to the groom's suite. As I approached his room, I noticed the heavy wooden door was cracked open. I could hear Trey inside with his fraternity brothers. They were laughing loudly, pouring expensive scotch that I had paid for. I paused outside the door, entirely out of sight, and listened as my soon-to-be husband bragged to his friends about his financial prowess. Trey was telling his groomsmen how smart he was for securing his financial future before walking down the aisle. He boasted that his new tech startup was going to make him a billionaire within 5 years. He laughed as he told his friends that he had forced his quiet, boring bride to sign a prenuptial agreement that morning. He said he needed to protect his incoming wealth from a woman who just played on her computer all day and had no real ambition. He was so incredibly arrogant, so utterly blinded by his own inflated sense of superiority, that he never even bothered to hire his own independent attorney to review the document. He had just signed the template my legal team had provided, completely unaware of what he was actually agreeing to. He thought he was building a fortress around his imaginary gold mine. He had no idea he was actually locking himself out of my real one. The prenuptial agreement we signed that morning explicitly and permanently separated all business assets generated during the marriage. It stated that any holding companies, venture capital firms, or real estate assets acquired under my name or my corporate entities were entirely untouchable. Even more beautifully, the document contained a mutually binding clause that permanently waived both parties' right to ever seek alimony or spousal support under any circumstances, regardless of the duration of the marriage. Back in the freezing conference room, the sound of a page turning snapped my attention back to the present. Julian had just finished reading the first section of the document. All the aggressive theatrical confidence had instantly drained out of his body. He looked pale, almost sickly, as his eyes darted over the signatures at the bottom of the page. Julian slowly lowered the document and looked at Trey with an expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He leaned over and whispered something harsh and urgent into Trey's ear. "What are you talking about?" Trey snapped, pushing his lawyer away and speaking loud enough for the court reporter to hear. "I signed that to protect my startup money. It does not apply to her hidden accounts. Tell them we are taking half." Julian rubbed his temples, letting out a heavy, exasperated sigh. He looked at Trey like he was looking at an absolute idiot. "You waived your right to everything," Julian explained, speaking slowly and deliberately, so his client could finally understand the reality of his situation. You signed a mutually binding ironclad waiver of all marital assets related to corporate holdings. You also permanently waived your right to seek spousal support. There is no loophole here. You are entitled to absolutely nothing. Trey's smug smile shattered completely. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he stared at his own lawyer. "No, that is impossible," Trey stammered, his voice rising in panic. "She manipulated me. She tricked me into signing it. We can fight it in court. Tell them we are taking this before a judge." "You told me we could tear her apart." Julian shook his head, refusing to meet Trey's desperate gaze. "You signed this in front of a notary. You explicitly declined independent counsel. No judge in the state of Georgia is going to throw out a standard business protection clause just because you failed to read the fine print 10 years ago. We have no case for her assets." Trey slumped back in his chair. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He had lost his job. He had lost his luxury house. He had lost his expensive cars. And now the massive financial payday he had promised his mistress was vanishing right before his eyes. He was completely and utterly destitute. But Julian was a shark, and sharks do not stop swimming until the water runs completely dry. Julian straightened his cheap suit jacket and looked across the table at my lawyer, trying desperately to salvage some fraction of his billable hours. "This prenuptial agreement may protect your client's business holdings," Julian said, his voice lacking its previous booming confidence. "But the extreme disparity in wealth could still be challenged on grounds of unconscionability. My client was left homeless with zero notice. We are not walking away from this table empty-handed. If you want this divorce to go quietly, you are going to have to offer a substantial cash settlement today." It was a pathetic bluff, and everyone in the room knew it. Julian was trying to extract a pity payment just so he could collect his legal fees. I looked at my lawyer, Denise, and gave her a single tiny nod. Denise did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply reached back into her leather briefcase one last time. She pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She did not slide the envelope toward Trey. She bypassed the cheating husband entirely and slid the heavy package directly across the polished mahogany table to Julian. I leaned back in my chair and watched the lawyer reach out to take the envelope. Julian had no idea what was waiting for him inside that yellow paper. He had no idea that the document he was about to read was going to make him pack up his briefcase and abandon his client before the hour was even up. The thick manila envelope sat on the polished mahogany table like a loaded weapon. Julian stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. He broke the wax seal with his thumb and pulled out a stack of paper-clipped documents. Trey leaned over, trying to look at the pages, but Julian angled the folder away from him. Julian was a predator who operated on calculated risk, and right now he was trying to calculate exactly how much money he was about to extract from me. I watched the muscles in Julian's jaw tighten. I watched his eyes scan the first page, dropping down to the second, and then flipping rapidly to the third. The aggressive theatrical confidence that had radiated from him just 5 minutes ago evaporated into the freezing air of the conference room. All the color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He was looking at a formal expedited notice of audit and tax liability from the Internal Revenue Service, stapled directly to a comprehensive corporate embezzlement report filed by Vanguard Ventures. When my forensic accounting team uncovered the $40,000 Trey had stolen to finance his affair with Vanessa, they did not just hand that information over to me. As the chief executive officer of a venture capital firm, I am legally obligated to report any misappropriation of corporate funds to the federal government. My accountants filed a detailed report with the IRS, showing that Trey had utilized a corporate expense account to purchase luxury hotel suites, high-end dining, and a $12,000 Cartier bracelet. Because Trey did not report any of those stolen funds as personal income, and because he used a business tax identification number to evade luxury taxes on his gifts to Vanessa, he had triggered an automatic federal tax evasion flag. The document Julian was currently holding stated that Trey owed the federal government $200,000 in back taxes, corporate fraud penalties, and compounded interest. Trey did not just lose his job. He was a massive sinking financial liability who was currently under active federal investigation. "What is it?" Trey asked, his voice dripping with impatient arrogance. He nudged his lawyer in the shoulder. "Is it a settlement offer? Tell her we are not taking anything less than $5 million. We know she has it." Julian did not answer him. He kept his eyes glued to the documents, his breathing growing shallow. He was doing the math in his head. Julian had taken this divorce case on a contingency basis, assuming he was going to secure a massive payout from a wealthy, vulnerable wife. He had likely spent hours dreaming about his percentage of the settlement. Now he was staring at a piece of paper that proved his client had a negative net worth and was actively being hunted by the federal government. There was absolutely no money to extract from me, which meant Julian was not going to get paid a single dime for his time. Worse than that, Julian realized he was sitting in a room representing a man who had committed federal tax fraud. If Julian continued to push a frivolous lawsuit for spousal support using a client who was actively under federal investigation, he risked being implicated or having his own legal license scrutinized. Sharks do not swim in toxic waste. Trey, growing frustrated by the silence, reached over and snatched the top paper out of his lawyer's hand. "What is this garbage?" Trey demanded, his eyes scanning the IRS letterhead. I rested my elbows on the armrests of my chair and looked at my husband. I thought about all the times Trey used to mock my financial discipline. During the early years of our marriage, I would spend my weekends reviewing tax codes, organizing offshore accounts, and meticulously tracking every single investment I made. Trey used to roll his eyes and call me a boring corporate drone. He told his friends that I was obsessed with spreadsheets because I lacked creative vision. He claimed that real bosses did not worry about pennies because they were too busy making millions. His profound financial illiteracy was always his greatest weakness. He truly believed that swiping a piece of plastic made him powerful, completely ignorant of the intricate legal machinery required to actually maintain wealth in this country. "This is a joke," Trey scoffed, tossing the paper back onto the table. He looked at me with a forced, dismissive laugh. "You cannot just call the IRS on me, Kendra. I was the managing partner of Apex Consulting. Those were legitimate business expenses. I was entertaining potential clients at the Waldorf Astoria." My lawyer, Denise, finally spoke. Her voice was sharp and perfectly measured. "You bought a $12,000 Cartier bracelet for a 28-year-old woman named Vanessa. You registered the purchase as a corporate client retention expense. Unless Vanessa is a silent partner at Horizon Capital, that is felony tax evasion." Trey bristled, his chest puffing out defensively. "My wife is a billionaire," he told Julian, gesturing wildly toward me. "She can write a check right now and make this disappear. Tell her she has to pay it. It was her company card anyway. She is liable for the charges." Julian looked at Trey with absolute unmasked disgust. The lawyer slowly closed the manila envelope. "The corporate card was issued in your name, Trey," Julian said, his voice entirely devoid of its earlier booming confidence. "You signed the liability waiver when you accepted the position. You are the sole individual responsible for the fraudulent charges. And since you signed a prenuptial agreement waiving your right to all marital assets, your wife has absolutely zero legal obligation to cover your federal tax debts." Trey stared at his lawyer, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The reality of his situation was finally crashing through the impenetrable wall of his ego. He was not going to get a settlement. He was not going to get spousal support. He was looking at total financial ruin and potential federal prison time. "We can fight this," Trey stammered, grabbing Julian by the forearm. "You said we were going to tear her apart today. You said the courts favor the dependent spouse. We just have to threaten to expose her businesses to the media. We can leverage her public image." Julian yanked his arm out of Trey's grip. He stood up from his chair and snapped his briefcase shut with a loud, definitive click. "There is no we," Julian stated coldly. "I took your case under the assumption that you were a marginalized spouse seeking fair equity from hidden marital assets. You failed to disclose that you signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement. You also failed to disclose that you are currently facing federal embezzlement charges. You lied to my firm and you represent a massive legal liability." Julian looked at the court reporter who was diligently typing every single word into the official transcript. "Let the record show that as of this exact moment, I am formally withdrawing as legal counsel for the petitioner, Julian announced clearly. I advise my former client to seek immediate representation from a criminal defense attorney. Good day. Julian turned his back on Trey and walked directly toward the heavy oak doors. Wait, Trey shouted, jumping up from his chair. His voice echoed with pure panic. You cannot just leave me here. We have a contract. I paid you a retainer. Julian paused with his hand on the brass door handle. Your retainer bounced yesterday afternoon, he said flatly. Good luck with the IRS. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Trey completely isolated on his side of the long mahogany table. The profound silence in the room was deafening. I sat perfectly still, watching the man I had supported for a decade crumble into absolute dust. He looked down at the IRS document sitting on the table. His hands began to shake. The swagger, the arrogance, and the aggressive patriarchal pride were entirely gone. He was just a broke, terrified man staring down the barrel of federal prosecution. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked like he was about to cry. Kendra, please, he whispered, his voice cracking. You cannot do this to me. I will go to jail. Please, you have the money to fix this. I am your husband. We built a life together. You have to help me. I did not answer him. I simply looked at Denise and gave her a slight nod. Denise stood up, gathered our documents, and placed them neatly into her briefcase. We had accomplished exactly what we came here to do. There was nothing left to discuss. I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my designer suit. I told you to take your personal belongings, Trey, I said quietly. It looks like you also get to take your personal federal tax liabilities. Have a wonderful afternoon. I turned and walked out of the conference room, Denise right beside me. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what Trey was doing. Alone in that freezing room, drowning in panic, and facing the absolute destruction of his freedom, Trey was realizing he had no money, no lawyer, and no leverage. His mistress had already abandoned him at a cheap diner. His mother's community standing was currently imploding. He was utterly defenseless. Terrified and desperate for a lifeline, I knew he would run to the only person left in his shrinking universe who still believed in the illusion of male solidarity. He was going to call the golden boy of the family. He was going to run straight to my brother Andre. The drive back to my penthouse after leaving Trey and his former lawyer in that freezing conference room was the most peaceful ride of my entire life. My driver navigated the busy Atlanta streets, and I simply watched the city go by through the tinted windows. For 10 years, I had carried the massive, crushing weight of everyone else's fragile egos. I had funded my cheating husband, I had protected my incompetent brother, and I had subsidized my hypocritical mother-in-law. Now, the heavy vault doors of my bank were permanently locked. I arrived at my luxury building in Midtown. It was a true fortress. The security protocol required biometric scanning just to get past the front gate, and the concierge desk was staffed by highly trained former private security contractors. I valued my peace, and I paid a heavy premium to ensure it was never disturbed by unwanted elements. I had barely stepped out of my heels and poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water when the intercom on my wall chimed. It was the head concierge, David. Ms. Davis. I sincerely apologize for the interruption, David said, his voice completely professional. You have 2 unauthorized visitors in the main lobby, a Mr. Andre Davis and a Mrs. Lauren Davis. They are extremely agitated. The woman is crying quite loudly. They are demanding to see you, claiming it is a life-or-death family emergency. Would you like me to have security escort them off the property? I took a slow sip of my water. Andre and Lauren, the golden boy and his perfectly passive-aggressive wife. The same 2 people who had humiliated me at their backyard barbecue just 4 days ago. The same brother who told me I was a bitter woman who could not keep her man happy. I told David to let them stay in the lobby and that I would be right down. I did not invite them up to my penthouse. They had not earned the right to step foot in my sanctuary. I slipped my heels back on, smoothed the front of my tailored suit, and took the private elevator down to the ground floor. The lobby of my building was a vast expanse of polished white marble and imported glass. Standing right in the center of it, looking entirely out of place and completely unraveled, were my older brother and his wife. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. Lauren was not wearing her usual condescending country club smile. The patronizing tone she had used on Sunday, when she told me to support my husband's excellence instead of competing with it, was completely gone. Her expensive designer makeup was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks. She was clutching a thick stack of crumpled manila envelopes to her chest, openly sobbing in the middle of a high-security corporate lobby. Andre looked even worse. My older brother, the man who loved to puff out his chest and play the role of the wealthy, untouchable patriarch, looked like a deflated balloon. His shoulders were slumped forward. His eyes were bloodshot and terrified. The arrogant swagger he carried at the grill just a few days ago had evaporated completely. Kendra. Thank God, Lauren gasped as I approached. She literally ran toward me, attempting to grab my hands. Please, you have to help us. We did not know. We swear to you on our lives we had no idea. I stepped back quickly, keeping my hands neatly folded in front of me to avoid her touch. You had no idea about what Lauren... Andre stepped forward, swallowing hard. His voice shook so badly he could barely form the words. The bank called me yesterday morning, Kendra. They told me the primary investor on my commercial loan had withdrawn their financial backing. They told me Vanguard Ventures had officially liquidated its position in my logistics company. He looked at me with eyes full of sheer, unadulterated terror. He had finally put the pieces together. He had finally realized that the massive corporate entity keeping him out of bankruptcy for the last 3 years was entirely controlled by the little sister he loved to look down on. The bank is calling the full balance of the loan, Andre stammered, running a trembling hand over his face. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings on the house tomorrow morning. My business accounts are completely frozen. They are taking the boat, Kendra. They are taking the cars. I am going to lose absolutely everything I have built. Lauren let out a loud, pathetic sob. You have to reverse it, Kendra. Please. You have the power to stop the bank. You are Vanguard Ventures. You cannot just pull the rug out from under your own brother. We are family. We are blood. I stood in the middle of that pristine marble lobby and looked at my brother. I looked at this man who had spent his entire life benefiting from a system that demanded my constant sacrifice. When we were growing up in Atlanta, our parents demanded absolutely nothing from Andre and everything from me. They told me to shrink myself. They told me to hide my brilliance because it was not ladylike. They told me to cater to the men in my life. And when Trey brought his 28-year-old mistress into a house I paid for, Andre did not defend me. He sent a text message to our entire family calling me a bitter woman. I did not pull the rug out from under you, Andre, I said, my voice echoing coldly off the marble walls. I simply stopped holding the rug up. Your logistics company has been operating at a massive deficit for 36 months. You are terrible at business. You spend money on luxury cars and country club memberships instead of paying your vendors. You are not a victim today. You are just experiencing the natural consequences of your own financial incompetence. Kendra, please. Lauren begged, tears streaming down her chin. Do not do this to us because of what happened at the barbecue. I am sorry about what I said to you. I was just trying to keep the peace. I did not mean to insult you. We will apologize publicly if that is what you want. Just please do not let us lose our home. Where are we supposed to live? I looked at Lauren, feeling absolutely zero pity for this woman. You were not trying to keep the peace, Lauren. You were trying to keep your status. You loved feeling superior to me. You loved looking down on the black woman who worked 80-hour weeks while you sat by the pool drinking mimosas. You thought you were so much better than me, all while spending money that came directly out of my corporate accounts. I turned my attention back to my brother. He was crying now. The great, strong provider of the family was weeping openly in the lobby of my building. Mom and Dad always said you were a natural provider, Andre, I reminded him softly. They told me that a man's highest calling was to lead his family and that my highest calling was to stay out of his way. They praised your natural excellence for 35 years, So now is your chance to shine. You need to use all of that natural masculine excellence to figure out how to pay your mortgage this month. Kendra, I cannot do it. Andre sobbed, his pride entirely shattered. I do not have the money. I never had the money. You know that. I am begging you. I am your brother. I took a deliberate step backward, completely removing myself from his personal space. You stopped being my brother the day you welcomed my husband's mistress into your home and told me to get over it. I turned to the concierge desk. David, I said clearly and firmly, these guests are no longer welcome on the premises. Please ensure they leave immediately. If they refuse, call the authorities and have them removed for trespassing. Yes, Ms. Davis, the concierge replied immediately, picking up his security radio. I did not wait to watch them be escorted out. I turned my back on them and walked away. I heard Lauren wailing my name, begging for one more chance, begging for a loan, begging for anything. I let her cries fade into the background as I walked down the hall. They were strangers to me now. They were just two more empty vessels that I no longer had the desire or the obligation to fill. I needed to get to my car. I had an afternoon meeting with my marketing team to finalize the launch of my new philanthropic foundation, and I was not going to let the pathetic tears of my brother ruin my meticulously planned schedule. I walked past the private elevator bank and pushed through the heavy security doors that led to the private underground parking garage. The garage was dimly lit, quiet, and perfectly cool. My designated parking space was located in the VIP section at the far end of the concrete structure, surrounded by expensive sports cars and luxury sedans. The sound of my heels echoed loudly in the cavernous space. I pulled my keys from my designer purse, preparing to unlock my vehicle and leave the drama behind me. As I approached my car, I noticed a dark shadow shift behind a thick concrete pillar. It was subtle, but the movement caught my eye immediately. The security in this garage was supposed to be absolutely impenetrable, but desperation makes people incredibly resourceful. A figure stepped out from behind the concrete pillar and moved into the dim, flickering fluorescent light of the parking garage. It was Trey. The ride away from the deposition felt like floating. I leaned my head against the soft leather headrest of my town car, watching the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta glide past my tinted windows. For 10 long years I had carried the massive, suffocating weight of everyone else's fragile pride. I had funded my cheating husband. I had protected my incompetent brother, and I had subsidized my hypocritical mother-in-law. I had shrunk my own brilliance just to keep the men in my life from feeling small. But as the car smoothly pulled into the secure gated entrance of my luxury high-rise building, I knew that era was permanently over. The heavy vault doors of my financial protection were locked, and I had thrown away the key. My new penthouse building was a true fortress. The security protocol required biometric scanning just to get past the front gate, and the concierge desk was staffed 24 hours a day by highly trained former private security contractors. I valued my peace, and I paid a heavy premium to ensure it was never disturbed by unwanted elements. I stepped out of the car, thanking my driver, and walked through the pristine, glass-walled lobby. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and fresh lilies. I had barely stepped into my private elevator and reached my top-floor residence when the intercom on my wall chimed a soft melodic note. I pressed the button to connect to the front desk. Miss Davis, I sincerely apologize for the interruption, David, the head concierge, said. His voice was completely professional, but laced with a hint of urgency. You have 2 unauthorized visitors in the main lobby, a Mr. Andre Davis and a Mrs. Lauren Davis. They are extremely agitated. The woman is crying quite loudly and causing a bit of a scene. They are demanding to see you, claiming it is a life-or-death family emergency. Would you like me to have security escort them off the property immediately? I took a slow, deliberate breath. Andre and Lauren, the golden boy of the family and his perfectly passive-aggressive wife. The exact same 2 people who had humiliated me at their backyard barbecue just 4 days ago. The same brother who told me I was a bitter woman who could not keep her man happy. The same sister-in-law who told me I needed to learn how to support a man's excellence instead of competing with it. I told David to let them stay in the lobby and that I would be right down. I did not invite them up to my penthouse. They had not earned the right to step foot in my sanctuary. I smoothed the front of my tailored suit, pressed the button for the lobby, and took the private elevator back down to the ground floor. The lobby of my building was a vast expanse of polished white marble, imported glass, and modern art installations. Standing right in the center of it, looking entirely out of place and completely unraveled, were my older brother and his wife. The physical transformation of these two people was absolutely staggering. Lauren was not wearing her usual condescending country club smile. The patronizing tone she had used on Sunday was completely gone. Her expensive designer makeup was smeared in dark, heavy streaks down her cheeks. She was clutching a thick stack of crumpled manila envelopes to her chest, openly sobbing in the middle of a high-security corporate lobby. Andre looked even worse. My older brother, the man who loved to puff out his chest and play the role of the wealthy, untouchable patriarch, looked like a deflated balloon. His shoulders were slumped forward, his eyes were bloodshot wide and absolutely terrified. The arrogant swagger he carried at the grill just a few days ago had evaporated completely into thin air. Kendra. Thank God, Lauren gasped as I approached. She literally ran toward me, attempting to grab my hands with her shaking fingers. Please, you have to help us. We did not know. We swear to you on our lives, we had no idea. I stepped back quickly, keeping my hands neatly folded in front of me to avoid her desperate touch. You had no idea about what Lauren. Andre stepped forward, swallowing hard. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. His voice shook so badly he could barely form the words. The bank called me yesterday morning, Kendra. They told me the primary investor on my commercial loan had withdrawn their financial backing. They told me Vanguard Ventures had officially liquidated its position in my logistics company. He looked at me with eyes full of sheer, unadulterated terror. He had finally put the pieces together. Trey must have called him in an absolute panic after the deposition babbling about Vanguard Ventures and my corporate holdings. Andre had finally realized that the massive corporate entity keeping him out of bankruptcy for the last 3 years was entirely controlled by the little sister he loved to look down on. The bank is calling the full balance of the loan? Andre stammered, running a trembling hand over his face. They are initiating foreclosure proceedings on the house tomorrow morning. My business accounts are completely frozen. They are taking the boat, Kendra. They are taking the cars. I am going to lose absolutely everything I have built. Lauren let out a loud, pathetic sob, dropping her head into her hands. You have to reverse it, Kendra. Please. You have the power to stop the bank. You are Vanguard Ventures. You cannot just pull the rug out from under your own brother. We are family. We are blood. We are supposed to look out for each other. I stood in the middle of that pristine marble lobby and looked at my brother. I looked at this man who had spent his entire life benefiting from a toxic family system that demanded my constant sacrifice. When we were growing up in Atlanta, our parents demanded absolutely nothing from Andre and everything from me. They told me to shrink myself so he could feel tall. They told me to hide my brilliance because it was not ladylike. They told me to cater to the men in my life. And when Trey brought his 28-year-old mistress into a house I paid for, Andre did not defend me. He sent a text message to our entire family calling me a bitter woman. I did not pull the rug out from under you, Andre, I said, my voice echoing coldly off the marble walls. I simply stopped holding the rug up. Your logistics company has been operating at a massive deficit for 36 months. You are terrible at business. You spend money on luxury cars and country club memberships instead of paying your vendors. You are not a victim today. You are just experiencing the natural, unfiltered consequences of your own financial incompetence. Kendra, please, Lauren, begged, tears streaming down her chin and dripping onto her silk blouse. Do not do this to us just because of what happened at the barbecue. I'm so sorry about what I said to you. I was just trying to keep the peace. I did not mean to insult you. We will apologize publicly to you if that is what you want. We will cut Trey off completely. Just please do not let us lose our home. Where are we supposed to live? I looked at Lauren, feeling absolutely zero pity for this woman. You were not trying to keep the peace, Lauren. You were trying to keep your status. You loved feeling superior to me. You loved looking down on the black woman who worked 80-hour weeks while you sat by the pool drinking mimosas. You thought you were so much better than me, all while spending money that came directly out of my corporate accounts. You welcomed my husband's mistress into your home and smiled in my face. You chose your side. Now you get to live with it. I turned my attention back to my brother. He was crying now. The great, strong provider of the family was weeping openly in the lobby of my building, begging his younger sister for a handout. Mom and Dad always said you were a natural provider, Andre, I reminded him softly, making sure he heard every single syllable. They told me that a man's highest calling was to lead his family, and that my highest calling was to stay out of his way. They praised your natural masculine excellence for 35 years while ignoring my actual hard work. So now is your chance to shine. You need to use all of that natural excellence to figure out how to pay your mortgage this month. Kendra, I cannot do it, Andre sobbed. His pride entirely shattered, his hands dropping to his sides in total defeat. I do not have the money. I never had the money. You know that. I am begging you. I am your brother. I have a family to support. I took a deliberate step backward, completely removing myself from his personal space. You stopped being my brother the day you told me to get over my husband's infidelity. You made your choices. I turned to the concierge desk. David, I said clearly and firmly. These guests are no longer welcome on the premises. Please ensure they leave the property immediately. If they refuse, call the authorities and have them removed for trespassing. Right away, Miss Davis, the concierge, replied immediately, stepping out from behind the desk and motioning for the security guards stationed near the entrance. I did not wait to watch them be escorted out. I turned my back on them and walked away. I heard Lauren wailing my name, begging for one more chance, begging for a loan, begging for anything to stop the free fall of her life. I let her cries fade into the background as I walked down the long, quiet hallway. They were strangers to me now. They were just two more empty vessels that I no longer had the desire or the obligation to fill. I needed to get to my car. I had a late afternoon meeting with my marketing team to finalize the launch of my new philanthropic foundation, and I was not going to let the pathetic tears of my brother ruin my meticulously planned schedule. I bypassed the main elevators and pushed through the heavy reinforced security doors that led to the private underground parking garage. The garage was dimly lit, quiet, and perfectly cool. The air smelled of polished concrete and expensive exhaust. My designated parking space was located in the VIP section at the far end of the structure, surrounded by high-end sports cars and luxury sedans belonging to the other penthouse residents. The sound of my heels echoed loudly in the cavernous, empty space. I pulled my keys from my designer purse, preparing to unlock my vehicle and leave the final remnants of this family drama behind me. As I approached my car, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement. I noticed a dark shadow shift behind a thick concrete support pillar near the elevator bank. It was subtle, but the movement put me instantly on high alert. The security in this garage was supposed to be absolutely impenetrable, but desperation makes people incredibly resourceful, and a man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous thing. A figure stepped out from behind the concrete pillar and moved slowly into the dim, flickering fluorescent light of the parking garage. He looked completely disheveled, his suit wrinkled and stained with sweat, his posture stooped and defeated. I watched Trey through the tinted glass of my sedan. He did not scream. He did not run after the car. He just stood there in the dim fluorescent light of the parking garage, his shoulders shaking, staring down at the single crumpled dollar bill I had dropped onto the concrete. My driver navigated the luxury vehicle toward the exit. The heavy metal security gates slowly rolled shut behind us, sealing Trey outside my fortress and entirely outside my life. I leaned my head back against the plush leather seat and let out a long, slow breath. The suffocating weight I had been carrying for 35 years was officially gone. I felt lighter than air. The smooth, quiet ride through the Atlanta streets was suddenly interrupted by the sharp vibration of my personal cell phone. I looked down at the bright screen. It was an incoming group audio call from my parents. My father Calvin and my mother Shirley were calling from their sprawling home in the suburbs, a home that I had quietly paid off 5 years ago. I knew exactly why they were calling. Andre had undoubtedly run crying to them after I had him and Lauren escorted out of my lobby. He had likely spun a wild, victimized tale about how his cruel, ruthless younger sister was intentionally destroying his life and destroying her own marriage. In my family, whenever a man stumbled, it was always the nearest woman's fault for not catching him. I tapped the green button to accept the call. "Kendra, my mother." Shirley snapped immediately. Her voice was sharp and laced with profound disapproval. "What in the world has gotten into you today? Andre just called us in absolute hysterics. He said you are letting the bank foreclose on his house and that you threw your husband out on the street. Have you lost your mind?" My father, Calvin, chimed in right behind her, his voice booming with forced patriarchal authority. "You need to stop this foolishness right now, Kendra. You are tearing this family apart over your bruised ego. Trey made a mistake, but he is your husband. Andre is your flesh and blood. You are a successful Black woman. Your job is to uplift the men in your community, not tear them down and strip them of their dignity. You need to call the bank, fix your brother's loan, and then you need to sit down with Trey and work out your marriage." I listened to their demands. I listened to the sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating through the phone speakers. For my entire life, they had conditioned me to believe that my success only had value if it was being used to subsidize the men around me. They had groomed me to be a silent financial engine, pouring my hard-earned wealth into a broken system just to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. I did not yell. I did not cry. I spoke with the icy clinical precision of a venture capitalist liquidating a toxic asset. "Mom. Dad. I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said softly. "I am not fixing anything. I am not calling the bank for Andre, and I am certainly not reconciling with a man who moved his 28-year-old mistress into my house." "Kendra, you have to forgive my mother," interrupted her voice rising. "You have to be the bigger person. Andre has a family to feed. Trey is trying to build a legacy. You have more money than you could ever need. Why are you being so greedy and vindictive?" "Because I am finally matching your energy," I replied smoothly. "Let us be entirely honest about what this family actually is. This is not a family. A family supports each other. A family protects its members. What you have built is a financial cartel, and you built it by exploiting your strongest, most capable member." The line went silent for a fraction of a second before my father scoffed. "That is highly disrespectful, Kendra. We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me expectations," I corrected him. "You praised Andre just for waking up in the morning while you told me my 80-hour work weeks were intimidating and unnatural. You watched Trey treat me like an afterthought, and you told me to pray harder. You did not raise a daughter. You bred a workhorse to carry the men in your lives across the finish line. You expected me to fund Andre's failed businesses, pay off your mortgage, and subsidize Trey's fake executive lifestyle, all while hiding my brilliance so their fragile egos would not get bruised. But blood is thicker than water," my mother pleaded, realizing her usual tactics of shame and guilt were not working. "Yes, and money is apparently thicker than blood," I countered. "I have spent the last 10 years financing this entire cartel, but the board of directors has just held a vote, and I am officially resigning my position. You wanted Andre to be the provider. Let him provide. You wanted Trey to be a mogul. Let him build his own empire. My bank is permanently closed. Kendra, if you hang up this phone and turn your back on your brother, you are turning your back on us." My father threatened, playing his absolute final card. "Do not expect to show up for the holidays. Do not expect to be welcomed in our home." I smiled, looking out the window at the beautiful city skyline. "I bought that home, Dad. But you can keep it. Consider it a final severance package. Have a wonderful life." I ended the call before either of them could utter another word. I did not hesitate for a single second. I opened the settings on my phone and I blocked my father's number. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Andre. I blocked Lauren. I blocked Evelyn. I blocked every single extended aunt, uncle, and cousin who had ever smiled in my face while demanding a handout. absolute uncompromising ghost mode. But I did not stop there. I opened my secure corporate portal on my laptop. It was time to sever the final microscopic ties that connected me to their world. I contacted my legal team and authorized the immediate transfer of my primary holding companies entirely out of the state of Georgia. I moved Vanguard Ventures and all its subsidiaries into blind trusts registered in Delaware and Wyoming. I removed myself as the emergency contact on all of their medical and insurance files. I canceled the family cell phone plans I had been paying for since I was 25 years old. I completely eradicated my digital and financial footprint from their sphere of influence. I was no longer the dependable daughter. I was no longer the supportive sister. I was no longer the quiet wife. I was simply Kendra, unburdened, untethered, and remarkably wealthy. The seasons changed in Atlanta, and the suffocating humidity of the summer gave way to a crisp, cool autumn. 6 months passed without a single word from my former family. The silence was not lonely. It was the most profound, beautiful peace I had ever experienced in my entire life. With Trey utterly unable to afford legal representation and actively dodging the Internal Revenue Service, our divorce proceedings went through swiftly and without a single complication. I dropped his last name, completely reclaiming my maiden name and my authentic identity. I spent those 6 months focusing entirely on myself and the massive expansion of my venture capital firm. Without the constant draining emotional labor of managing Trey's life and Andre's debt, my businesses absolutely skyrocketed. My mind was clear, my vision was sharp, and my profit margins were breaking industry records. I was no longer operating in the shadows to protect anyone's feelings. I stepped firmly into the light, taking full public credit for the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. Now it was a Friday evening in late October. The dust from the divorce and the corporate restructuring had completely settled. I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite of my penthouse. I was wearing a custom floor-length gown made of shimmering black silk. My hair was styled perfectly. Diamonds rested against my collarbone. I looked like a woman who owned the world. Tonight was not just another corporate dinner. Tonight was the official, highly publicized launch gala for my brand new philanthropic foundation. It was the biggest, most important event of my professional life, and the entire city of Atlanta was watching. As I picked up my designer clutch and prepared to head out the door, I knew exactly what was waiting for me at that gala. I was about to step fully into the spotlight, and the entire city was about to see exactly what Black excellence really looked like when it was finally unbothered, unapologetic, and completely unleashed. The grand ballroom of the High Museum of Art in downtown Atlanta was bathed in the warm, golden glow of custom lighting and the soft, elegant melodies of a live string quartet playing contemporary rhythm and blues. It was a Friday evening in late October, exactly 6 months after I had systematically dismantled the financial cartel my family had built on my back. The air in the room was electric, vibrating with the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that only comes from genuine celebration. Tonight was the official launch gala for the Vanguard Initiative, my new philanthropic foundation dedicated entirely to empowering, mentoring, and funding young women of color in the fields of finance, technology, and venture capital. For 10 years, I had hidden my wealth and my brilliance in the shadows to protect the fragile egos of the men in my life. Tonight, I was standing completely in the light. I wore a floor-length custom black silk gown that draped perfectly across my figure. A simple diamond necklace rested against my collarbone. I did not need to wear flashy labels or loud, heavily branded accessories to prove my worth. True power does not need to shout. True power simply commands the room the moment it walks through the doors. The gala was packed with the most influential figures in Atlanta. Mayors, tech innovators, prominent artists, and brilliant young scholars filled the space, networking and building genuine connections. I had just finished my keynote address, announcing a $10 million seed fund that would provide debt-free capital to businesses founded by Black women. The standing ovation had been deafening. It was a profound, deeply emotional moment. I was finally using my resources to build up people who actually wanted to change the world, instead of draining myself to subsidize people who just wanted to look important. I stepped off the main stage and wove my way through the crowded ballroom, greeting my guests and shaking hands with the brilliant young women who were the first beneficiaries of my foundation. I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder and turned to see Denise, my fierce and brilliant lead legal counsel, holding out 2 crystal flutes of sparkling cider. "Congratulations, Kendra," Denise said, her eyes shining with genuine pride as she handed me a glass. "You completely captivated the entire room. This is exactly what Black excellence is supposed to look like when it is not being suffocated by toxic expectations." I smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "Thank you, Denise. I could not have reached this finish line without your legal expertise. You helped me clear out a massive amount of dead weight." Denise let out a rich, warm laugh. "Speaking of dead weight," she said, lowering her voice slightly as we stepped toward a quieter corner of the ballroom near a massive floral arrangement. "I had lunch today with a colleague who works over at the federal courthouse. It seems the Internal Revenue Service did not offer your former husband a favorable payment plan." I took a slow sip of my drink, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Tell me everything," I said. Denise leaned in. "Trey is completely drowning. Because of the corporate embezzlement charges and the tax evasion penalties from the money he spent on his mistress, the federal government garnished his wages to the absolute maximum legal limit. Since he was publicly fired from Apex Consulting and blacklisted from the corporate world, he had to take whatever work he could find. The great, self-proclaimed business mogul is currently working as a floor salesman at a big box electronics store out in the distant suburbs. He wears a blue polo shirt and a name tag, and practically his entire minimum wage paycheck goes straight to the federal government." I felt a profound sense of closure hearing those words. Trey had spent a decade mocking my long hours, telling me I was just playing business while he brought home the real money. Now he was working retail, answering to teenage shift managers and making barely enough to afford his rent at a cheap motel. "And what about Vanessa?" I asked, curious about the woman who had walked into my kitchen and insulted my velvet sofa. "Oh, she is completely bankrupt," Denise said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. When Trey lost everything, she tried to maintain her fake influencer lifestyle on social media. She maxed out a dozen credit cards trying to buy designer clothes and book luxury hotel rooms to pretend she was still living the high life. The credit card company sued her. She got evicted from her luxury apartment last month and had to declare total bankruptcy. She is back to working as a bottle service girl at a nightclub, heavily in debt and completely invisible. It was exactly the ending they both deserved. They had tried to build a kingdom on stolen ground, and the earth had simply swallowed them whole. As Denise and I continued to chat, another guest approached us. It was Cynthia, a prominent real estate developer in Atlanta, and a woman who used to attend the same mega church as my former mother-in-law. Cynthia embraced me warmly, congratulating me on the foundation launch. "Kendra, sweetheart, you look absolutely stunning," Cynthia said, her eyes sparkling with the kind of insider gossip that runs deep in Southern high society. "I just had to come over and tell you how proud we all are of you. And to be completely honest, I had to tell you that the entire congregation at Greater Hope Fellowship is still talking about your dramatic exit." I smiled politely. "I hope the church is recovering well." "They are recovering," Cynthia laughed softly. "But Evelyn certainly is not. When you pulled your funding and submitted that forensic audit to the authorities, the church board went into an absolute panic. The elders held an emergency meeting and ousted Evelyn from her position as the head of the community outreach board in total disgrace. She was forced to step down in front of the entire congregation to save the church from losing its tax-exempt status. She is a total social pariah now. She cannot even show her face at the Sunday morning service without people whispering about her designer hats being bought with stolen charity money. Her entire reputation is completely destroyed." Evelyn had built her entire identity on judging other women using her religious title to mask her own profound insecurities and greed. Now the community she had weaponized against me had cast her out entirely. Before Cynthia could continue my logistics, Manager David walked past us carrying a clipboard, ensuring the catering staff was keeping the champagne flowing. He paused to give me a respectful nod. "Everything is running perfectly," Boss David reported. By the way, I ran into an old vendor of ours this morning. The guy who used to service the trucks for your brother's logistics company. I raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Andre is officially out of business, David said, shaking his head. The bank fully foreclosed on his massive suburban estate. They repossessed his luxury boat and both of their cars. He and Lauren had to downsize rapidly. They are currently renting a cramped one-bedroom apartment out in a rougher part of town. Lauren had to take a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic just to help pay for their groceries. I heard she does not smile much these days. I thanked David and excused myself from the group. The music was vibrant, the laughter in the ballroom was infectious, and the energy was entirely uplifting. But I needed a moment of quiet. I needed to step away from the noise and fully absorb the magnitude of this reality. I walked through the heavy glass doors that led out onto the museum's expansive outdoor terrace. The cool October night air washed over me, a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the crowded ballroom. I walked up to the edge of the balcony and rested my hands on the smooth stone railing. I looked out over the glittering, sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city lights stretched out for miles in every direction, a vast network of power, ambition, and endless possibility. For 10 long years, I had allowed my family to convince me that I was responsible for their comfort. I had believed the toxic narrative that a strong black woman must carry the weight of the men around her even if it breaks her own back. I had hidden my massive success so that Trey could feel like a giant. I had funded Andre's failures so he could pretend to be a patriarch. I had tolerated Evelyn's abuse so I could maintain the illusion of family peace. But as I stood on that balcony, listening to the beautiful sounds of a new generation of women celebrating their own empowerment inside the ballroom behind me, I realized something profound. My revenge was not just in taking back my money. It was not just in watching Trey lose his job or seeing Andre lose his house or exposing Evelyn's hypocrisy. The ultimate revenge was the absolute, unshakable peace I felt right now. The greatest victory was not their destruction. It was my own liberation. I had finally stopped shrinking. I had finally allowed myself to step completely out of the shadows and command the space I had earned. I took a deep, cleansing breath of the cool autumn air. I looked at the towering skyscrapers lighting up the dark southern sky, knowing that I owned a piece of that horizon. The greatest lesson I learned from dismantling my family's illusions is that you can never purchase genuine loyalty. For a decade, I shrank my brilliance and hid my success to protect the fragile egos of the men around me, believing my sacrifice would ensure our peace. I was completely wrong. When you subsidize toxic people, you do not heal them. You simply fund your own disrespect. True power is not just about accumulating wealth. It is about having the absolute courage to walk away from those who exploit you. Never dim your own light to make someone else feel tall. If you have ever had to stop shrinking yourself to protect a toxic person's fragile ego, let me know how you took your power back in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button for more stories of unapologetic excellence.